Take the power, Madam McGriffin.
Monsieur le Sénateur Gorst. Monsieur le Sénateur Farnham.
Present.
Madame le Sénateur Ferguson. Monsieur le Sénateur Lafondre.
Present.
Madame le Sénateur Valois.
Present.
Madame le Sénateur Moore.
Present.
Monsieur le Sénateur Pallet.
Present.
Monsieur le Sénateur Mezek.
Present.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Hélier. Madame le Connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Present.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Sauveur. Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Brelade.
Present.
Monsieur le Connétable de Grouville.
Present.
Monsieur le Connétable de la Trinité.
Present.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Present.
Monsieur le Connétable de Sainte-Marie.
Present.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Ouen.
Present.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Martin.
Present.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Jean.
Present.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Clément. Madame le Député Martin.
Present.
Monsieur le Député Southern.
Present.
Madame le Député de Grouville.
Present.
Monsieur le Député Lewis.
Present.
Monsieur le Député Tadier. Monsieur le Député Higgins.
Present.
Monsieur le Député Masson. Madame le Député Pinel.
Present.
Monsieur le Député de Saint-Martin.
Present.
Monsieur le Député de Saint-Ouen.
Present.
Madame le Député Dublé. Monsieur le Député Labbé.
Present.
Monsieur le Député Wickenden.
Present.
Monsieur le Député de Sainte-Marie.
Present.
Monsieur le Député Truscott.
Present.
Monsieur le Député Young.
Present.
Monsieur le Député Ash.
Present.
Monsieur le Député Morel.
Present.
Monsieur le Député Guida.
Present.
Monsieur le Député de Saint-Pierre. Monsieur le Député de la Trinité. Monsieur le Député de Saint-Jean.
Present.
Madame le Député Lehegra. Monsieur le Député Ayer. Madame le Député Pershaw. Monsieur le Député Ward.
Present.
Madame le Député Alves.
Present.
Monsieur le Député Pamplin. Madame le Député Gardner.
Present.
Madam McGriffin.
Prions Dieu. Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait les cieux et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et les puissances de la terre pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton Saint-Nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, et de les conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit, que toute la délibération étant accompagnée de ta bénédiction, réussisse au bien et au soulagement du peuple, qui te plut de commettre le soin. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par le mérite de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui est aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne. Ta volonté soit faite dans la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous induis pas en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal, car à toi le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen. Monsieur le Sénateur Gorst.
Excusez.
Madame le Sénateur Ferguson.
Excusez.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Hélier.
Excusez.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Excusez.
Monsieur le député Tadier,
I can see Deputy Tadier in the chat, so
I'm here, but you don't seem to be able to hear me.
we can hear you
can
now,
now.
Senator. Loud and clear.
Oh, good.
I think we'll record Deputy Tadier as present because he clearly is.
Senator Ferguson.
Hello,
Monsieur-
sorry, I realised my volume was down, so I was just sitting here patiently. So schoolboy error, apologies, but I've been here since 9:30.
Monsieur le député Masson,
Present.
Madame le député Dublay,
Present.
Monsieur le député de Saint-Pierre,
Present.
Monsieur le député de la Trinité,
Present.
Monsieur le député Ayer,
Present.
Madame le député Perchard.
Malade.
Vous jurez que Madame le député Perchard est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister aux États sans exposer sa santé. Monsieur le député Pamplin.
Present.
Les États sont constitués. So we resumed the sit-in this morning. Continuing the order paper, the next proposition is the draft Electronic Communications Amendment number 2 Jersey Law, lodged by the Minister for Economic Development, Tourism, Sport and Culture, P81, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Electronic Communications Amendment number 2 Jersey Law 2000, a law to enable the witnessing of signatures to be effected by electronic means and for connected purposes. The states, subject to the sanction of Her Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Senator Farnham.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Morel will be acting as rapporteur for this item. Thank you.
Deputy Morel.
Thank you, sir. Sir, these amendments to the Electronic Communications Jersey Law 2000 modernise the framework under which business is conducted digitally in Jersey. The amendments are required to enable businesses to take advantage of new technologies, to reflect common business practices, and to provide greater certainty to the law, whilst taking into consideration lessons learned from COVID-19 and the remote working that took place during that period. The Electronic Communications Jersey Law 2000 was designed to facilitate digital business, and so these amendments are a continuation of that policy. The law has been in force for over 2 decades. In that time, there have been rapid and significant developments to technology and user behaviour. Last year, government started to engage with a working group orchestrated by the Government of Jersey and Jersey Finance Limited to consider the electronic communications law in light of these new technologies, increasingly common business practices and lessons learned from the accelerated move to remote working as a result of COVID-19. The working group also gave consideration to clarifying certain aspects of the e-coms law where the law could benefit from greater certainty. The suggestions of the working group were formulated into a consultation paper, with consultation responses being supportive. Consultees included representatives of the legal and financial services industries, charities representing vulnerable individuals, the Law Society, the GREF, the Viscount, and others. The suggested amendments of consultees were consistent with the working group perspective, as well as policy intentions, including to ensuring that business online can be conducted safely, while safeguarding vulnerable individuals. In brief, the amendments consist of the following: a long-term solution for remote witnessing of signatures as a result of COVID-19 measures were introduced, but these measures are temporary and restricted in their application. Certainty under the law is given that electronic signatures provided by another, where they have authority to do so, are valid. There is a need for greater clarity that a signature, seal, attestation, or notarization is not to be denied legal effect, validity, or enforceability, only because it is in electronic form, whether such a requirement is a result of statute or otherwise. And there will be greater clarity that the e-communications law applies both to documents sent to another person and also documents which are simply stored after execution. Thank you, sir.
Are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Deputy St Mary.
Thanks, sir. Just to advise that the scrutiny panel had the benefit of a briefing on this law. We are satisfied that it is necessary to meet the business requirements of the island and are therefore happy to endorse it. There is, however, one point which the Assistant Minister might clarify in his summing up, which relates to the cincture of wills. The law makes no exemption or makes no special provision for wills. My understanding is that it is because there is further legislation under the probate and wills law or similar, which requires an additional, which makes it a requirement that they are signed in person, as is now the case. My understanding, sir, is that that particular legislation is being addressed, and that until it is, the law in force pertaining to wills remains in force, but that when the new legislation comes into force, they will be able to do it without the need to refer back to this particular new piece of legislation. But I will be grateful if the Assistant Minister will clarify it in his summing up. Thank you.
Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. It's just a little question around, it says in part of, I think it's on page 7, but that's in the PDF document. Article 9C does not apply to the signature of a minister required for the purpose of making Jersey subordinate legislation, brackets within the meaning of legislation, Jersey Law 2021. Does that mean that a minister cannot sign a ministerial order electronically or while they are off island? Particularly, for example, if a minister has may spend some of their time living off island, but signing ministerial orders electronically in that way, just to understand what it may mean in terms of governance.
Deputy Higgins.
Thank you, sir. Just following on from Deputy Johnson, one area of the COVID regulations and electronic contracts, etc., that has concerned me is the question of wills and the witnessing of them, and to try and prevent people being coerced and so on. Will the Assistant Minister assure the Assembly that any measure relating to changes to the provisions of wills will be brought back to the Assembly and not just done by order? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? Senator Valois.
Yes, thank you, sir. I'd like to ask the Assistant Minister about the requirement around the order and the caveats that might be expected, and whether there'll be provision for guidance being laid out for understanding of businesses in the way that they apply such caveats and exemptions, and whether he'd be able to give us an example of what an exemption might look like that isn't already being included in the amendments in this in this legislation that we're agreeing today. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? If no other member wishes to speak on the principles, I will close the debate and call on Deputy Morrell.
Thank you, sir. And I thank the speakers and their intelligent questions. I'll start, sir, with Deputy St Mary. As I understand it, he's entirely correct in his summary of the situation. Wills currently will not be covered by this law, primarily because of probate law. At the moment, the probate law means that wills cannot be undertaken remotely or with electronic signatures. So it is the case that once this law comes into force, wills will still need to be signed in person and in wet ink. And until any changes to the probate law come forward, that will remain to be the case. With regard to the question about probate law and whether it's coming to the Assembly or not from Deputy Higgins, I have, because that is not part of our department's or my remit, certainly, is I'll have to check and find out whether that will come to the Assembly or by order. I imagine it is coming to the Assembly because it is probate law. I can't imagine that would be done by order, but I will endeavour to clarify the situation for him. Deputy Ward asked about Article 9C and ministers. And yes, this article is entirely focused on ensuring that ministers have to be the people who give the permission for their signature to be used. Basically, what this article is saying is that the signing of a ministerial decision cannot be delegated to an officer by this way. The important thing here is to ensure that it is ministers who sign ministerial decisions. And so, whilst a minister can ask for their electronic signature to be attached, and then somebody else attach that signature, it has to be on the express authorization of the minister. So I think it's a really important safeguard. Senator Valois' question about will provision for guidance be provided? I believe that is the case, but I will ensure that she is provided with a definite answer to that, because I haven't spoken. I believe that would be Jersey Finance likely to provide that information, particularly for finance businesses and Jersey business for other businesses in the island. But again, I will have to get back to her to ensure that's the case. And as far as exemptions are concerned, the main exemptions are, as I said, wills and also these ministerial decisions. So with that, I move the proposal.
Thank you very much. I think in this moment, the graphier will drop a link into the chat for a vote on the principles. That the link is available, so I call the members to cast their votes. Thank you very much. If all members have had the opportunity to cast their votes.
I'm having difficulties as well, sir. Can I vote for actually accepting?
Thank you, Deputy. All members have had the opportunity to cast their votes. I ask the graphier to close the voting.
So Deputy Ash here, I was a poor as well, I couldn't get in.
Well, I've closed the voting, Deputy Ash, but just for you, I'll make an exception on this occasion.
Most kind, thank you.
The principles have been adopted. There were 38 votes poor in the link, 3 votes in the chat, and 3 votes orally, which makes 44 in total. Deputy St Mary, this proposition falls to your panel. Do you wish to call it in?
No, we are happy with it and do not wish to call it in.
Thank you very much. Deputy Morrell, how do you wish to deal with the articles?
En bloc, please.
Do you wish to speak to them or just to move them?
I get a sense from the Assembly. I believe we could move straight to the vote, sir.
Well, let's see if anyone wants to speak first.
Absolutely.
Does any member, are the articles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the articles? No member wishes to speak on the articles. We'll move to a vote. I will take this as a standing vote unless anybody here or in the chat calls for the appel.
Appel, please, sir.
The appel's been called for. So I'll ask the graphier to put a link into the chat. The link is there, so members can cast their votes. This is on the articles. All members have had the opportunity to cast their votes.
So I'm having trouble with that form. It's done now, so it should be fine. Thank you, sorry.
All members have had the opportunity to cast their votes. I will ask the greffier to close the voting. And the articles have been adopted. 42 votes per, no votes contra, and there were 2 additional votes in the chat, so 44 in total. How do you wish to deal with the matter in third reason, Deputy?
What respect, sir?
Do you wish to propose it now for third reason?
Pardon?
Do you wish to propose it now for third reason?
I would like to propose it now.
Do you wish to speak?
I will briefly speak and thank
Can
members.
I just check that third reading is seconded?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Morrell.
I am new to this, sir. I'd like to thank members for their support. I think one of the most important aspects of these amendments are that they provide business with clarity as to when they can and should or cannot accept electronic signatures. There was confusion before, and particularly in the finance sector, that was proving difficult. So this does change it. I also want to just address Senator Valwad's question again. I did forget to say that lasting powers of attorney are also exempt from this. So it's wills, lasting powers of attorney, and the safeguard for ministerial signatures. But with that, I'll propose in the third reading. Thank you, sir.
Should have got it seconded after that, but never mind. I think we'll assume it is. Does any member wish to speak on third reading? If no member wishes to speak, I will ask the greffier to put a link to a vote on third reading into the chat. The link is available, so if members could cast their votes, please. All members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I will ask the greffier to close the voting. The third reading was, the draft law was adopted in third reading, 42 votes per, no votes contra, additional vote on the link. So that's 43, in the chat, sorry, it's 43 in total. So the draft law was adopted in third reading. Next item of business is the draft COVID-19 Enabling Provisions Amendment number 3 Jersey Law 2000 P83, lodged by the Minister for Health and Social Services. I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft COVID-19 Enabling Provisions Amendment number 3 Jersey Law 2000, a law to amend further the COVID-19 Enabling Provisions Jersey Law 2020. The states, subject to the sanction of Her Most Excellent Majesty in Council, have adopted the following law.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. This law would, if adopted by the Assembly, extend the operation of the Enabling Provisions Law to the 31st of July 2022. As I'm sure members are aware, this enabling law serves to underpin the whole suite of COVID regulations which we have put into place over the last 18 months. The law gives the Assembly the temporary authority from Her Majesty in Council to make those emergency regulations. And though the renewal of those emergency regulations will follow if by the next proposition. The majority of those regulations, of course, are no longer enforced due to the fortunate position we're in at the moment, but it is essential, I believe, that the legal tools to control COVID-19 are retained whilst we remain in a pandemic. So this extension to the enabling law is intended to ensure that we retain the capacity to manage that legislative framework that enables us to take decisive action when it's needed, but which also restricts islanders' liberties as little as possible. We have agreed extensions to this law on 2 previous occasions during the pandemic, because of course it is only intended as an emergency temporary measure, and it is not a permanent law. However, members will notice that the planned extension date of the 31st of July next year is beyond the term of this government. In practice, however, we would need to take a decision as to the expiry of the legislation well before that time. So I would consider that before the state's prorogues, if that's the right word, enters into purdah, whatever term we're using, next spring, we will have decided whether we still need to maintain any of the COVID legislation for that continuing period. Because it's the case at every extension, we've asked this Assembly to consider the duration of the law and regulations. The July expiry date simply reflects that there's an unavoidable tail of procedure to go through any decision by this Assembly on the law that can, before it can have legal effect. Members will know that I'm proposing that the detailed regulations are extended to the end of April 2022. This date of 31st of July 2022 is necessary because we need to leave sufficient time after April for the Privy Council to meet and consider the legislation and for it to be granted royal assent and returned to the island to be registered in the Royal Court. So for safety, we've allowed 3 months. So I propose the principles.
Are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Senator Mezek.
Thank you, sir. And I wanted to speak early in this to hopefully establish this initial point, which is that I do not think that we're debating a minor matter. I think this is actually extremely serious. And I think that we ought to have had a much greater explanation from the Health Minister just now on why it is necessary, given where we are in the pandemic, to extend the enabling provisions as long as he is proposing. And to my knowledge, there doesn't appear to have been a briefing of states members to give us the confidence that what is a drastic departure from our usual constitutional process continues to be valid. And I would make the point to members that this is being proposed now towards at the early stages of October for something to take place, for this to be extended from 6 months from now to a later date after that. We do not know right now whether that will be necessary. We don't know where we're going to be in February or March next year to know that this extension of the enabling provisions will actually be necessary. So I think there are 2 points to make on that. The first is, do the government know something that the rest of us don't in terms of their projections for what's likely to happen in the pandemic next, in terms of another wave or something like that? And why can they not come back to the Assembly with these with this proposal to extend the enabling provisions in perhaps January next year, if it is clear from that, once we've got through the start of winter, where the island is going to be at that point? If I can cast members' minds back to the start of the pandemic last year, when we were meeting up at Fort Regent and the enabling provisions were first proposed, there is absolutely no doubt that they were necessary, because at that point we did need to make decisions extremely quickly, and we needed power to reside in the right places so that we could react as the pandemic developed to make sure that we protected people. And it was absolutely clear and obvious to anyone to see that that was absolutely necessary. When it was first put to us as a Council of Ministers, of which I was a member at the time, it was proposed actually in a more far-reaching version than what actually came to the Assembly, in that what was initially proposed to us was for these powers to be held for a significantly longer period of time. It was around about 2 years, if I remember rightly, rather than short periods to be renewed as and when was necessary. And there wasn't anything that I saw at that point that stipulated it was purely for COVID-related issues. And I objected at the time, saying that that amounted essentially to a UDI, in that it completely took away the safeguards and the checks and balances that are provided by the Privy Council for an extended period of time. And then what came to the Assembly in the end was a version which did limit it to COVID provisions, and which did it in a shorter period of time with the option for renewal, which was clearly a much more appropriate position to be in. And we were able to stomach that because it was necessary for the pandemic, even though it represented a departure from our usual democratic process and concentrating power in hands that at that point didn't have that power. And now we're asked at this point to extend it further, which I am more than happy to do if it's necessary and if it can be demonstrated to be necessary. But I'm not happy to risk it becoming the new normal. I think we do have to return to our usual constitutional process at an appropriate time. And right now, with what the Minister has put to us in his opening speech, he has not established whether that is necessary to do right now on the 8th of October, when there is still a significant period of time to go of these powers being held as they are now, without the safeguards of the Privy Council. There is still time to see how we do over the next few months, whether we have that fourth wave, whether we have a winter where everything goes wrong again, and then whether we need to convene at the start of next year to extend the powers then, if they turn out to be necessary. But if they don't turn out to be necessary, we shouldn't do it. We should get used to the fact that we should get used to going back to our normal procedures at some point. So I want to actually say to the Minister that I would like him to withdraw this proposition today. I would then like him to convene a briefing for States members to make the case for these, to be absolutely transparent with us about what advice they are receiving about what is likely to happen over the next few months with the pandemic. And if he can demonstrate that it certainly is necessary to retain these powers for a longer period of time, then I will have no problem authorising that. My party will have no problem authorising that, and I would hope the states would have no problem in authorising that. But as I was uncomfortable at the outset of this in authorising departure from our constitutional process, today I'm not happy to vote in favour of extending that further when a case has not yet been made for it. And I would prefer for this to come back at a later stage where the necessity of it can be demonstrated to be much clearer than it is now. And I wonder if it's being proposed at this point out of convenience rather than necessity. And I don't think when it comes to something that is as serious as a departure from our usual constitutional process that this should be dealt with on the basis of convenience, but should be dealt with on the basis of necessity. And that case has not been made, but there is still plenty of time that the Minister and the government can use to make that case. So So I asked the Minister to withdraw it at this point and come back to it once it's been, once he has taken the efforts to demonstrate its necessity to states members. He's got plenty of time to do that, and we will not be obstructive in any way in supporting his efforts to do that. But if he's not prepared to do that and withdraw the proposition, then I would urge members to vote against it now and be ready to reconsider it in future if it proves necessary. And let's be clear, we all hope that it's not necessary. We all hope that actually we return to normal as soon as possible and can move on from this and return to how we normally pass laws in this assembly, with that important safeguard and the checks and balance provided by the Privy Council. And this should not be seen as something that becomes the way that we normally make laws in Jersey. So I hope the Minister will respond to those points.
Thank you. Before I call the Constable St John, it's a question for the Attorney General from Deputy Wards.
Well, so I think I may hold it back because it depends on how the rest of this goes. It was going to be a question about after this Parliament ends and goes into election process and the effect, the cause and effects of these emergency powers during that period. But I think it may be better to ask that later if necessary, because I may have a more structured question at that time. So I'll withdraw the question for the moment. So thank you.
Okay, Constable St John.
Thank you, sir. Sir, we're told by the Minister that members should support this proposition because it is essential that the tools to manage the pandemic are retained. This proposition is based on a false premise. This is not a case of either retaining legislative tools to manage a pandemic or not. This is a matter of executive convenience that the Minister wants this Assembly to rubber stamp. This is not how emergency powers should be exercised. The threat of a future emergency is not a good enough reason to justify the continued use of emergency powers. Or if it was, then surely we would always allow the government to have emergency powers just in case. So this Assembly approved the Enabling Provisions Law on the 27th of March 2020. That was just 17 days after the first reported case of COVID-19 in Jersey. This is despite it being a once-in-a-century event, in respect of which we had no template or past experience to fall back on. The world is not the same place as it was in March 2020, and Jersey is no exception. We now possess a greater understanding of both the virus as well as the legal framework required in the event of future outbreaks or waves. It would not take the Minister 17 days to bring this back in the future should an emergency present itself. Sir, the law-making process is presented in this proposition as being made as an administrative inconvenience to the Minister. The point is poorly made. We have a robust and mature law-making process to ensure that our laws are properly made and not simply rubber stamped by this Assembly upon the whim of the Minister or his officers. As the Minister says, this proposition would seek to extend the Enabling Provisions Law beyond the general election and the lifespan of this Assembly. He now says we can remove the law before his proposed end date. So why? Why ask to extend to the end of July today? The Minister is seeking to place untold emergency powers with this proposition into the hands of an executive in respect of which we have no idea who this will be. That notion, sir, is shocking to me and is contrary to our values, I believe, which we hold dear. What could happen with these powers during Purdah? This proposition is ill-considered. It is not good enough to extend emergency powers because it is administratively convenient to do so. This Assembly, sir, should be treated with greater respect and, more importantly, trusted by the government to debate matters of emergency as and when they arrive. We read in our JEP only last week that Dr. Muscat saying things are improving. At a recent meeting that I had, sir, with the Health Minister himself and his Managing Director, they both acknowledged we are no longer in an emergency. Sir, we need to give people hope and confidence, be they employees, employers, islanders of all ages. We can do this by removing the emergency status when the current term ends. Yes, we need to remain cautious, but we also need to get used to living with COVID. we keep reading that testing could be relaxed at the ports. So we're in a very different position to March 2020. I was disappointed earlier this week with the Chief Minister's reluctance to have a review of how COVID has been handled. We can always learn, and we must learn to do things better and improve wherever we can. The Health Minister in the news recently in respect of assisted dying being debated in principle stated that he was opposed and said, "I fear there is too much trust being placed in what legislation can do." Yet in respect of P83, Deputy Renouf is asking members to support it, just in case. Well, which one is it? Either legislation is a mechanism in which it is appropriate to use in order to create a reservoir of powers to hold in reserve, or it isn't. If it isn't appropriate, as the Deputy states in relation to assisted dying, then how can he at the very same time propose P83 rather than simply bring the proposition should it ever need to be needed in the future? The two positions do not logically sit alongside each other. I would echo Senator Mezek's request for the Minister to withdraw the proposition, and if he is unable to, then, sir, I would urge members to vote against this proposition. Thank you.
Councillor Simperlard.
Thank you, sir. I, like previous speakers, do not agree that these regulations need to remain. I would refer, sir, to STAC, the Scientific Technical Advisory Cell, who appear to be the body advising the Minister. I've been disappointed over the last year that we States members haven't been privy to the minutes from the meetings of that body where these decisions have been made. It really has been unsatisfactory, and we are distant from the information the Health Minister has received, and therefore are unable to make up our minds as to whether the advice, which is, I suspect, suddenly often made as a knee-jerk reaction to world events, possibly inappropriate to the island. Secondly, sir, I note that the P83 suggests there are no financial implications. Well, I would contend, sir, that there are significant financial implications, and perhaps the Minister would care to outline how he arrives at the fact that there aren't. The reality is, sir, that islands have got used to the pandemic and understand and can make their own decisions to mitigate against it. The Minister may not have noticed or have not been included in the many emails sent by concerned people on the matter. I've seen a lot. We had representations outside in the Royal Square yesterday, sir. These people are genuinely feeling that the continued application of these regulations is unnecessary. I cannot therefore continue to support the continued infringement of public personal liabilities, and will not support this piece of legislation, and would urge the Minister to consider seriously the proposals put by Senator Mezek in referring this bit of legislation back. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Teddy.
Thank you, sir. I'm heartened that there's a good cross-section of members in the Assembly normally from different political persuasions who are worried about this emergency power continuing and who are speaking against it and also will be voting against it. And I know that we've all had to make some very difficult decisions over the last 18 months, and I would hope that all of us in the Assembly walk that fine line between libertarianism and allowing state intervention where it's deemed justified, and that depending where we are on the traditional political quadrant, we will feel more comfortable or less comfortable with the provisions that have been passed up until now. But I think the key change that's happened is that we've put our community, and it's been reflective of what's happened in communities throughout the world and throughout the West, through a great programme, first of all, of restricting civil liberties, of saying don't do this, don't do that, you're not allowed to do that. Do you remember, if we go back to the beginning of the pandemic, we were actually imprisoning people in their homes effectively, saying you can only go out for 2 hours a day. And that was even worse for the elderly and people in a care home setting where they were actually literally incarcerated and treated probably worse than prisoners at Lamoille prison, who could at least, I imagine, go out into their courtyards. And that situation, I don't need to remind members, has existed a lot longer than it needed to, if indeed it was necessary in the first place for those who were least mobile and least able, but also most vulnerable in our society. And my point that I've always made is that you cannot have a perpetual state of emergency. Otherwise, it leads to a dictatorship and it erodes democracy. There have been examples of this in recent years throughout the world, often on the proviso of counter-terrorism, whereby new powers have been brought in, stop and search powers, especially following what should be called 11/9 in the US. And one can't help the feeling that when those powers just become the norm, something about our humanity fundamentally changes, our civil liberties and our relationship with the state. And I presume that I'm not the only one who has to have a certain amount of introspection when you go out and you wonder, why do I feel uncomfortable in ordinary interactions that in the past were just considered normal? And even if we do accept that up until now all this has been necessary, something has got to give, hasn't it? Because we're not in the same situation we were. We've told people, do this, do that. So, you know, wash your hands, wear a mask. You're not allowed to go out and meet your friends. Christmas has been cancelled for some people, certainly was in my family. And, you know, when you go to the supermarket, don't touch things, don't pick things up. But get a vaccine. It's your choice, but get a vaccine. Oh, by the way, get another vaccine. You're double jabbed. If you want to be able to travel, you need it. Oh, let's get a third vaccine. Oh, so you need a third vaccine now, do you? Just to be extra safe, because you need 3 vaccines within the space of a year, just to guarantee that you're not going to get COVID. And you know what? You can have a booster as well. So get one every 6 months. And I would ask, where does this all stop? So even, I'm not criticising the vaccine programme. I mean, our civil service, our frontline staff and our officers, and no doubt even ministerial colleagues and the Assembly have done a great job in all this. But where does it end? And if we test, I'm not saying it's the same as flu, but if we tested for flu, like we've tested for COVID, do you know what? You'd probably shut down the whole of society, because you'd realise that so many people have potentially got it. If we contact traced everybody who had flu, imagine if we, you know, instead of rolling out this programme and continuing the emergency powers, we just started testing people for cancer, because cancer is a massive killer. Yet people who can't afford to go to the doctor routinely have been offered, you know, numerous PCR tests, and they probably had more contact in the space of a few months with the medical staff than they've had in their entire lives, because they can't afford to go and see their own GPs because of the state of our healthcare system. Now, I don't want to take this off into too much of a tangent, sir, but I think you see where I'm going with this. And we can't, on the one hand, tell society that they need to do this, do that, and then when they comply, say, actually, but nothing's changed. We're still going to retain these emergency powers just in case we need to. And I'm sorry, that isn't acceptable. Now, there are a couple of issues directly I want to address with the proposition. If I can find that I did have it up, but I'm going to have to do this from memory. Now, the first paragraph in the minister's proposal says that we want to keep these powers in place, but in order to restrict islanders' liberties as little as possible. But that's not true at all. The whole point of the law is to have an emergency power which can, if the minister wants to, restrict members of the public rights and civil liberties as much as possible. And if you look at the actual enabling law, I think it's in paragraph 4, it gives a very wide remit for the minister to and the states by regulation to basically change any law they want, with a couple of exceptions that relate, for example, to human rights law. And it's not just that, we're also putting a massive burden businesses and the private sector, because who enforces all this? So when we put out a statement saying you must collect everybody's data and make sure that for contact tracing, it's businesses who have to do that. When you say you must wear a mask in a shop, if that's what's going to happen, it's the poor staff, often on minimum wage or below living wage, who have to approach people and say, oh, by the way, you're not wearing a mask. Is that really their job? Do we want them to carry on having to do that potentially into the next 12 months? And I know the minister says, well, this is just in case. It's just in case there's a resurgence of COVID. And I say, no, this has to stop. We have to go back to normal. And if it means living with COVID, which is what we've been told we have to do, then we have to do that. And we cannot restrict our civil liberties and give government unrestricted powers if they want to use it. And I do ask the question, what happens if if these powers need to be introduced or during the purdah period, when we're in election period and the States isn't sitting? Somebody's going to have to make those decisions. Those emergency powers could and might be used. So for me, this is one step too far. I don't think it's been proven that this is proportional, and it's a line in the sand which I cannot support today, sir. Thank you.
Deputy Southern.
Yes, sir. Thank you. What I want to point out is that our democratic principles and practices are no mere playthings. I believe the minister is treating them as exactly that, too lightly by far. And the Connétable de Saint-Jean made a valid point when he said, and also, pragmatically, we've had no assessment of how effective any of the measures that we took under emergency powers have been. And I, for one, would certainly wouldn't want to be voting for a continuation of emergency powers until I've got some sort of analysis. It needn't be enormously massive, but we've got 3 months, 4 months in which we could analyse what worked and what didn't, and whether we should consider seriously repeating some of those steps, which actually caused more harm in some cases than they did good. So I'd want some sort of analysis, and I would expect members of this assembly to want some analysis of how effective and how good the measures that we took were, so that we can repeat the good and eliminate the bad. Thank you.
Constable St Martin.
Thank you, sir. I cannot support this proposition. We have not been given and do not have adequate reasons to do this. As previous speakers have stated, this assembly will not be here in July. As it is at the moment, we'll be a completely new body of people. We'll have a new assembly. A new chief minister will be voted for on July the 5th, but this order is in place until July the 22nd. What provision is in place for the weeks when this assembly is dissolved? Who will be in charge of these emergency powers? Surely we should know. I'd have thought that was, so important to know who would be having these powers whilst none of us, whilst we're all in purdah. This is a really dangerous precedent to set. Are we becoming a nanny state? If we vote for this today, we go way beyond what is reasonable and just. As previous speakers have said, if the minister will not withdraw this legislation, which I really believe he should, and bring it back to us, and I'm more than happy in January if we find out that we do need this legislation when we know what is happening. I'm sure that the Assembly will vote it through, but as previous speakers said, and the minister will not withdraw this legislation, I really do implore members to vote against this, because we do not know who will be having these powers in July next year, or April to July this next year.
Thank you. Deputy Pamplin, you have a question for the Attorney General.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I'm wondering if the AG can advise the Assembly at this stage and explain the legal ramifications if, as some members are asking for, that this was rejected today, what the impact will be, and to cover the regulations. As my understanding, between Regulation A and S, some are suspended and some are extended, and the regulations have expiry dates to the if this is approved, to the end of 30th of April, and if that was to remain, the enabling emergency provision would remain till October. So could you just bring that clarity, and also, sorry, long questions, but explain why they're there, and remind, because of the lack of some of the laws that we don't have in our very dated public health law. Hope that will make sense for him. Thank you.
Attorney General.
Sir, I apologise. I was out of my room at the start of that question. I apologise to the to Deputy Pamplin. Would you mind repeating the question, please?
Yep, of course. Thank you, sir. So basically, just could you advise the Assembly what would the ramifications be if we didn't vote for this today? And secondly, the explanation between how, because some of the regulations between ANS are suspended, some have been extended, the ramifications of that, and the explanation of the fact that the regulations will be extended to April, but as far as I understand it, the emergency enabling provision would be extended to October, to explain that, and also to explain why the public health law is not fit for purpose. That's why we have these in place, just so we have some understanding. And I guess the time required if this wasn't to go through and then suddenly something was needed. I hope that all makes sense.
Can I just clarify, Deputy Pamplin, we're talking about P83, which extends the COVID-19 enabling provisions Jersey law from 1st of April 2022 to 1st of August 2022. Are you cross-referencing to the next proposition, P84?
Yeah, I was trying to do both.
Well, I think we have to be quite clear what we're talking about here. We're only talking here about P83. So if you have a question about the ramifications of P83 for aspects of P84, that's fine. But if the question is solely about P84, that really has to wait till the next debate.
Of course. So yeah, so I guess the ones impacting on this proposition then.
Attorney General.
Sir, in terms of Deputy Pamplin's first question, that was about the procedural implications of what would happen if this proposition was not approved by the Assembly today. So there is a procedural rule, I think, that it's more a matter for you, sir, that if a proposition is not approved, then there is a period within which the proposition cannot be brought back on the same point to the Assembly, but that, sir, is more a matter for you. But in terms of what I can speak to, if this particular proposition was not approved, then the position would be that the general enabling law, which is the subject of this proposition, would continue in force until its current expiry date, which is, I believe, the 31st of March 2022. And the various sets of regulations, which, as you pointed out, sir, are the subject of the next proposition, would remain in force either in suspended or active form until the 30th of April 2022. So the ability to both make regulations amending primary law and the ability of the Minister to make orders pursuant to the regulations, such as to bring in the wearing of face masks, that would continue until the 30th of April 2022. So I hope that assists as far as the implications of what would happen if this vote was not approved today. Proposition was not approved today. In terms of the public health law, I think there is a general consensus that the current loi 1934 is simply not fit for the purpose of dealing with this pandemic. I would add that there are considerable difficulties with the Emergencies Powers Law, which is why we proceeded by way of the General Enabling Law to deal with COVID. And the General Enabling Law places the ability to deal with the implications of the pandemic in the hands of the Assembly, so that it can proceed, the Assembly can make democratic decisions, or the democratically elected representatives of the people in the Assembly can make decisions about how to respond to the pandemic. And then part of those, and pursuant to those decisions, regulations are passed amending laws, and those regulations will give usually the Minister for Health the ability to make ordering powers to bring in face mask wearing, or in extreme situations a lockdown at short notice, should the medical circumstances prevailing require that. So the WIRE 1934, I'm afraid, is not fit for purpose to deal with the pandemic. I understand that the government is working on proposals to bring a revised public health law, but I'm sure that will take considerable time, and that is why we need to proceed by way of using the General Enabling Law, which is the subject of this proposition, and the regulations made pursuant to it to deal with the pandemic. I hope that assists the Deputy with his questions.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have a question for the Attorney General from Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. I think it will be a clearer question now. Can I ask the Attorney General, during the period of PERDA, who has, if this law was to be extended, who has the ultimate power to extend the regulations that we have? And is there the power also invested with this law to add new COVID regulations, or regulations on the limitation of movement, etc., without any reference back to an Assembly that I suppose won't actually exist formally? So just for that mechanism, what it will actually look like, it'd be very interesting to know. So thank you.
Attorney General.
So yes, the concept of PERDA is a political concept rather than a legal one. So the powers that are granted to say, it's predominantly, I think, if not exclusively, the Minister for Health under the various regulations that have been passed to deal with COVID, they will continue to remain with him, and if the circumstances warranted, then there wouldn't be a legal difficulty with him exercising those powers. The political consequences of doing so in PERDA are an entirely different matter for members. In terms of the period between what would happen between the election date and the swearing in of a new Council of Ministers, a new Chief Minister, that is governed by the Public Elections Law and the revised arrangements that the Assembly approved earlier this year. And as to whether the Minister for Health would remain in office between the election date and the period of swearing in a new Council of Ministers, my recollection is that I think he would, but I would need to check that. Again, I hope that assists the Deputy with his question.
Thank you, sir. I just wonder whether I may clarify one thing. When the Attorney General says if circumstances warrant changes to the law. Is that a decision on those circumstances that is solely therefore at that stage with the minister and another minister accordingly, due to the, if you like, the dissolving to some extent of the assembly itself?
No, not quite. The minister has order making powers which are for him to exercise. There are controls on those order making powers. Normally there has to be a necessity test, or there is a requirement to consult with the chief medical officer. So there are controls on those powers. In terms of a change to the law, no, that is a power that remains with the Assembly. It's not the minister's power to change the law. He merely operates with the powers that have been granted to him under the sets of regulations which the Assembly has passed. Again, I hope that deals with the Deputy's question.
We also have a question from Deputy Young.
Thank you, sir. I think obviously it seemed to me that this was straightforward, but clearly it isn't in view of what's happened. But my memory says that we did use the enabling powers to do transitional arrangements, for example, on the island plan. And of course, we've got another one coming up later on the agenda today. So what if we don't extend this? Obviously, that means one can't pass new subordinate legislation, but what happens to the subordinate legislation that we have passed? Does it fall away? And do we have to then replace it with something else in time by the 1st of April?
In general.
No, the subordinate legislation in the form of regulations remains in place until the 30th of April. In terms of orders, those are periodically renewed by the minister, and I think those can have to remain to continue to make those orders also continues until the 30th of April. It's what happens after that which is the subject of this particular proposition. So in terms of transitional arrangements or order making powers in relation to the island plan, those will continue until the 30th of April.
Okay, so thank you, sir. So okay, I assume from that then that if we don't pass this, then we'd have to look at that and try and deal with any issues that arise. I think so.
Thank you. We also have a question from the Minister, Deputy Singwon.
Thank you, sir. If I may just ask for clarification on the last answer given to Deputy Young. It's my understanding that the regulations that we have passed under this enabling law expire imminently on the 30th of October, 31st of October, just in a few weeks. And the next proposition, which I hope we will get round to debating, is the one which requests the extension to the 30th of April. So I think the Attorney General may have just said that the subordinate legislation is in force to the 30th of April. It was my understanding it's only in force to the 30th of October this year. And therefore, perhaps could I seek clarification on that? Thank you, sir.
Attorney General.
So I must say I have not checked each specific expiry date for each piece of subordinate or regulations that are the subject of the next proposition. I have, so if I've given the wrong date for the particular set of subordinate legislation that is of concern to the Minister for Environmental Planning, then I apologise for that. But I was simply concentrating on this proposition and not dealing with all the specific bits of regulations and subordinate legislation, which are the subject of the next proposition.
Thank you. Next member to speak is Deputy Massell.
Thank you, sir, and I thank the AG for all of that information. It's been very helpful. Sir, I don't know where members are. As far as I'm concerned, we're still in a pandemic. We're approaching winter months. We know that in the winter months, there's going to be a spike of COVID or COVID-like diseases, and we still need to be sensible in steering our community through this period. And as I recall, members have supported when challenged all of the government's measures throughout this period, and I think that's testament to actually the reasonableness of our health minister, who I know, when being at the CAM meetings, has been extremely cognizant of the issues around civil liberties, and the wider impacts on the community. They bear heavily on his mind. It's been an extremely stressful situation. I praise the minister again for holding it together through this period. Who would want to be health minister during this time? I think he's done incredibly well. And he's been, I feel that the deputy, the health minister, has been very reasonable through all of this. So this extension and the raft of legislation that the minister is asking to bring, I'm backing him to the hilt. I think it's been very reasonable. I think that to extend this over the PERDA period, because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know about mutations. I mean, it strikes me as those members who were very, very critical of the government at the start of this, saying, "Oh, you've not been fast enough. You've not responded fast enough. You've not done this," want to remove that now until we're through this period. So, sir, I'm going to be backing and supporting the health minister, as I have done through this period. So there is an expiry date, and that will be during when the new assembly is formed. As I understand it, the new council of the current council of ministers only falls away once the final minister has been appointed under a new chief minister. So those are the individuals that are going to be in power until then. Sir, and I think, whilst not perfect, and whilst I'm sure they haven't got every decision right, they've done a very good job, and we should, as we have done in this assembly, support the minister through this period. Thank you, sir.
So, point of order, Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. And the point of order is that I would like to invoke a reference back, if I may, sir, and if you rule it in order, and I'll explain why, if you grant me leave to do that.
Well, for a reference back, if I turn to the appropriate standing order, you need to do so on the basis of requiring further information relating to the proposition or any ambiguity or inconsistency in information. So yes, you can propose it, but you need to explain what it is you want before I'll allow the proposition to be debated.
Thank you, sir. I thought that would be the case. I just wanted to make sure there's no clause that a certain number of speakers need to have spoken. I don't think that's the case. So there are several pieces of information which I think are lacking and which I would seek from the minister. But the first of which, and it's something that actually Deputy Masson referenced, he says that we don't know whether there's going to be a new pandemic or a new mutation. And I would like to see any projections or predictions and the intelligence from the health department, because they must have those predictions about scenarios and about what they think is going to happen in the winter months with the pandemic, in the light of the fact that we've had an extensive vaccine program that's been rolled out to most of the population. So that's the first point of information. The second point would be really to do with human rights. I notice in the proposition it says that no human rights notes are included in this proposition, as it raises no issues of compliance with the EU Convention on Human Rights. And I would like more information about how that short paragraph was arrived at, because it seems to me that there are overriding human rights issues in this, which may be proportional, of course, but they've not been justified, because there's a potential here for a whole raft of human rights and civil liberties being restricted further, which that paragraph doesn't do justice to. And the third point, and I'll leave it at those 3 points, is that I'd like to see what consultation has been done with businesses about the implication for extending these powers further, given the fact that pubs, clubs, supermarkets, etc. are the ones who are likely to have to be enforcing these emergency powers if they are to be used when we extend them, sir. So I think there are 3 tangible and clear areas that I'd seek information on, and that I'd ask members' support for the Minister to come back to the Assembly with, if he wants us to grant an extension for these serious powers, which he thinks are proportionate, sir. And there's time to do that, I believe.
Thank you. So the 3 areas are information or projections about the future course of COVID, or an account of what the department thinks the position is on that at the moment. Further information on the rationale for the human rights statement that's been provided, and information about the extent to which, or the nature of consultation with business about the possible extension of powers arising from this piece of legislation.
That's a good summary, sir. Thank you.
Well, I think that's allowable. So we can, if it's is the reference back.
So can I ask whether I'm allowed to amend the member's version of what extra information he wants to add to it, the assessment of the effectiveness of the measures already taken, before we start on fresh ones?
Well, what normally happens, I think, Deputy, is during the debate, members who think there are other gaps can make that point, and then it's really up to the department to take that on board, because obviously if they didn't, there would be a risk of a further reference back if they came back not having dealt with it. So I think we prefer to operate in that way rather than to get into the business of amending the remit of a reference back, if that's okay. So if you could maybe make that point in a debate. Is the reference back seconded? Thank you. I have Constable St Clement. Do you wish to speak on the reference back, Constable? On the main debate, fine. Deputy of St Juan.
Thank you, sir. And I'm pleased to be able to tell members I will be able to accept a reference back, and I hope, because there's really nothing sinister about this. This is a largely procedural exercise, which members have gone through and seemingly understood on 3 previous occasions. The occasion when we put this structure in place, and on 2 renewals since. I am sorry if we've got to a point today where we've lost that understanding of exactly how we try to manage COVID, but I would try and help members because it is complex, and I get confused, so please excuse me. We don't have the powers as a legislature, as government, to respond to a pandemic situation. As the Attorney General has said, our existing public health law, dating from 1934, is not equipped, not appropriate, doesn't have protections that the present legislation has. So what was determined at the beginning of the pandemic was that we needed this framework, which allowed us to put in place provisions which would normally be put into a law. But our laws, of course, take time to draft, they need to be lodged, then there needs to be a debate, the proper democratic process, and after our debate, it goes to the Privy Council, then it comes back to the Royal Court here for registration, and then it comes into force on an appointed day. We were facing a situation where we were expecting, advised that we might see hundreds of deaths and significant illness. We sought the permission of the Privy Council to take temporary powers to put in place emergency legislation. And that was agreed by this Assembly, unanimously, I think, almost unanimously if my memory is incorrect. And the Privy Council agreed very rapidly that we do so. So they put in place the enabling law, which enables us to make those sort of provisions which would normally go into law. But the enabling law doesn't contain the provisions itself. Those provisions come forward by way of regulation. And regulations have to be put before this Assembly. And they always have been. So we may have sometimes convened at very short notice, but it was always for debate. And it was always the case that this Assembly has approved the regulations that detail subordinate legislation that was necessary for dealing with the pandemic. And it has been necessary, I'm afraid, to act very quickly sometimes in order to keep the island and its population safe. Because without that structure, we cannot test at the border. Without that structure, we can't enforce isolation for positive cases, whether they're coming in through the border or whether we identify them within our community. Without that legislation, we can't contact trace people and require their details to prevent the spread of infection. We can't ask businesses simply to take the basic details of those who might attend their venues or places of entertainment and the like. We can't require masks to be worn on public transport. So if members want to remove all of that, that's fine, but that will be the democratic choice which we've always followed in addressing this pandemic. But do we really want to be in a position where we can't enforce isolation on positive cases? This, as I was saying in answer to Deputy Gardner's oral question, this is not yet endemic. So those who make the contrast with flu, we're not yet at that stage because there is an immunity in the population to flu. We've largely dealt with it, and it affects, in the main, frailer people. But we still have an unvaccinated population, principally our young people and some adults who've chosen or for some health reason can't be vaccinated. We are still in a pandemic, although perhaps it's not, well, it is certainly not as severe as it has been. So that perhaps gives a broad overview of what we're trying to do. Now, I just want to concentrate on some dates, if I may, because the regulations, that is the subordinate legislation, not this law, this is about the next proposition if we get to it. That's about the isolation requirements, that's about contact tracing, etc. There's not a great deal in force at the moment. Most of it is suspended, but those are the two main provisions. All that subordinate legislation expires on a single date. What is it today? It's the 8th. It expires in about 3 weeks' time. It expires on the 30th of October. So if those are not renewed, and it's the Assembly's wish to, we will not be able to ask positive cases to go into isolation. So I will be seeking a renewal of those, but I can accept this reference back. because, yes, it's because this enabling law, of which I am seeking a renewal, is still in force after the 30th of October. The enabling law expires on the 31st of March next year. And that is simply the overarching framework which allows us as an assembly to make the regulations. It's the framework given to us by the Privy Council to make those regulations. It's only temporary because Senator Mezek is right, and he's referenced discussions within the Council of Ministers, and he will remember that I supported him, and all ministers supported him, because that's what came forward. We asked for that provision to be temporary. It's not a perpetual state of emergency that the Privy Council has said to this assembly, you can make your own laws. So that's expiring, that framework's expiring on the 31st of March. Now, in the next debate, I will be asking members to extend the regulations that have the effect, I've just gone through the measures we currently have in place, to extend those to the 30th of April 2022, 6 months. We've generally done 6 months, previous extensions. 30th of April. That's not yet PERDA. So there'll be no question of a minister, and it might be me, exercising powers outside of PERDA, unless that's decided, but it won't be today, it'll be any future debate in the spring. We would have to decide how we might manage COVID over PERDA, if COVID was still a risk then. So in that subsequent debate, I'm asking for the extension of the regulations to the 30th of April. Oh, but I've just said the enabling law expires on the 30th of March, 31st of March. So you see, I suppose I could have asked for the regulations to expire on that same date, in which case everything would grind to a halt on the 31st of March. But we've tried to be consistent here and keep kind of rolling framework. So the reason I brought today the request that the enabling law be extended is to allow me to, or to allow this assembly to extend the regulations to the 30th of April, because they could not be extended if we did not have the enabling law provisions in force at that time. So I'm trying to get this right. I know it is complex, and I'm sorry if I've not conveyed that complexity to states members. So the proposal in this proposition, P83, is to extend the enabling law only for a further 3 months to the 31st of July 2022. But if members had wanted to debate it today, they need not have had any concern, because the enabling law itself gives no powers to ministers. It just allows this assembly to make regulations. The powers are not in this enabling law. The powers are in the regulations, which will expire on the 30th of April. And I've said in my opening speech that we will need to address in the spring, obviously before PERDA, what we need to do if COVID is still a risk at that time. And that might be a more difficult debate, because there will be a PERDA period, but it's not the debate for today, I suggest. But because of that timeline, we've still got plenty of time before the present provision, the present enabling law extension expires. So I will gladly accept a reference back, with apologies if the report or my speech did not adequately explain what we've done before. So please, I don't want members to be frightened by this. I don't want the impression to be given to the general public that we are in an emergency situation. Government is taking drastic, unwarranted powers, because it is really not. You know, we've done this 6 months at a time. It is this assembly that has made the subordinate legislation that gives powers, and this assembly is often challenged, and we've had those debates about ministers' decisions. And together we have come through this, and we've used this framework, and it's worked well for us in an emergency situation. And I don't think it's right to say we are yet out of that emergency situation. I'm not the medic or the public health expert, but you know what Dr. Muscat would say if he was addressing us. So let's be cautious. Let's stick with the framework we have. I would ask members to allow me to proceed to the next debate and give that extension of the regulations, which are going to expire in 3 weeks' time, to the extent that we need them. Following a reference back, we will put in place some means of having this broad discussion of how it all works. Yes, projections, predictions. We've said that we are bringing out a winter strategy. The human rights implications, but I hope I've explained those in what I've just been saying. There are no financial implications of the law. There are financial implications of the regulations, the cost of managing COVID, but of the law, it's just that framework. And yes, we'll also talk about what consultation there is with businesses and the effect on business of managing COVID. I could reply at length to try and placate members' fears about perpetual states of emergency and where does it end, but I hope this is, I'm conscious, and thank you for the latitude, sir, because I know this is only a reference back debate, but I hope it's been helpful, and I am willing to accept the reference back. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Indeed, I have given wide latitude to the Minister, because I think the Assembly probably wanted to hear what he had to say, but this is a reference back debate, and the Minister has accepted the reference back. Just remind members that we normally call members in order, but the Attorney General is asked to speak, and it's generally, I think, to the convenience of the Assembly to hear what he has to say urgently. So I will ask the Attorney General to speak next before continuing with the speakers list. Attorney General.
Yes, sir. And I just simply wish to confirm what the Minister has said in terms of dates and why it's appropriate for him to accept the reference back on this proposition, but why he wishes to proceed with the next proposition concerning the extension of regulations. Because in the interim of when the Minister asked his question to me about those regulations, the subject of the next proposition, yes, sir, I have checked the expiry dates of some of those regulations, and I do see that they expire on the 31st of October. So I simply wish to confirm, supplement my previous answer to the Minister for Health's question, and I hope that is of assistance to members when considering both the acceptance of the reference back and the next proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Deputy Morrell.
Thank you, sir. And I'd like to thank the Minister for accepting the reference back. I think it's definitely the right thing to do. And just want to say that one of the reasons it's really important that we are seen to be extending emergency powers at the appropriate time, and I don't think this is the appropriate time, except for perhaps some particular technical reasons that the ministers has talked about, is we know there are people in our island who are incredibly suspicious about these emergency laws. I personally agree fully with Deputy Masson when he said about the confidence in the health minister. From the beginning of this, I've been very aware that we mustn't give the government, competent authorities too much power, etc., that it's a dangerous thing we're doing. And I've said this before in this assembly, what I've been really impressed by with the health minister is that he has withdrawn or suspended regulations when or amended them when he's seen that they're either not working in the way that's needed or that they're unnecessary now. And that's given me great confidence in his decision making with regard to regulations and their extension. But that confidence, unfortunately, isn't shared by people in our population. And I get the feeling that if there are people in our population who feel that the enabling law has been extended earlier than necessary, so making that decision has come earlier than is necessary, I fear that that message will be twisted into one of the government's power grab, etc., etc. And so I think it's really important that we do this in a timely manner in terms of at the right time, and that means in a sense at the last possible moment, because to do otherwise is going to feed that message about a government power grab, and that's not one that the island needs, because we do have to try to remain as united as possible in this. And I want to support the health minister in the extensions as and when they're needed. But I do think that because this doesn't need to actually be extended until March next year, this enabling law, I fear that we would be, if we were to do it, then it would fuel those suspicions about power grabs, etc., etc. So I thank the minister and I ask him to bring back the enabling law at a more appropriate time. And I'd suggest January, to me, looks like the most appropriate time to do that, when we'll have seen by that point how far how the winter has progressed, because absolutely the winter is our next big concern, and regulations do need to be in place at least until the spring for that reason. But it may be that come winter, come January, we can see that actually we don't need these regulations in the same way, and perhaps we all feel that we don't need to extend the enabling law. So in pursuit of a unified island on this particular matter, I think absolutely the health minister is doing absolutely the right thing in accepting the reference. Thank you, sir.
Can you send to Mezek?
Thank you, sir. I won't speak for too long. I think the case for the reference back has been made effectively, and I'm pleased that the minister is accepting it. He said in his speech that he wanted to assure us that this was never anything sinister. And I certainly believe the minister when he says that, and I don't doubt for a single moment that his intentions were good here. I do have to point out, though, sir, that what was originally presented to us, in my view, did have sinister undertones. Originally presented as in what council ministers were originally presented, which was essentially a 2-year power grab without appropriate limitations, which I at the time described as being effectively a UDI, and to exploit a pandemic situation to make that sort of power grab, in my view, as it was proposed, was a sinister thing to have done. And we therefore have to be vigilant moving forward, because it is possible that those forces may re-emerge or may try to get what they'd initially proposed, which in my view would be entirely wrong and extremely undemocratic and dangerous. And the minister had said that he had approached this anticipating that it would be largely procedural, and I want him to know that that was the wrong thing to do. He shouldn't have anticipated this debate being largely procedural. It is on an extremely important principle, and when the principle is so important, it is right that we have the right detail and information at our disposal to know that we're making the right decision. And if it transpires that there is a strong case for extending these powers in order to protect people at the next stages of the pandemic, which could be worse than we currently anticipate, then it will be right for that power to be there to protect people, but that power has to be used proportionately, and there has to be a strong case in support of it, which up until now, that case has not been presented to us. So I hope with this reference back, the Minister will treat that seriously and come back to us with much more detail as the proposer of the reference back has asked for. So I hope that members have been persuaded by that case and will support this reference back.
Thank you. Next to speak is Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. And I would like to thank the Minister for the really sensible decision he's made today in terms of accepting the reference back. But I think it's a very positive move. And so I want to point out a couple of things. First of all, this is not about personality. I don't agree with some of the things that were said earlier regards the personalities involved. The decision making must be almost impossible at times. I think we all recognise that. And within that role, from whatever minister, it must be difficult, and we get that. But so I think there's a really important point to be made here about why clarity of the extension or not of this law is important, because I think it gives validity to the decision-making process. I think a point made by Deputy Morel about the population of the island needs to be brought with us with any decision-making in terms of extending powers. And the way to do that is to come back at the end of the winter, when we've been through the winter, because those powers are already there until the end of March. That's a very important point. And I think the simplicity of this debate is exactly that. The powers exist to the end of March to do the things that we can decide on in this assembly now. But it's then when we have a much greater clarity of where we are in terms of this pandemic and the world, and whether it's become endemic, that was something we talked about before, that will give greater strength to whatever we decide then, because we can say to people, look, actually, we have delayed, we haven't made rash decisions, we are now coming back to this situation, and there are reasons why we can either say we do not need to extend these powers, or we do need to extend these powers. That, I think, is very important with any decision-making process around this. And it's been a very difficult time, and these are very difficult decisions in terms of civil liberties. We all know that. So I would say that when we say it's not a perpetual state of emergency, that's good. It doesn't mean that the concerns that we had at the beginning of the pandemic to act quickly are gone. It means that we have greater clarity on the type of action that we can take. And I think, dare I say, we have more sophistication in the way that we make decisions now, because we've learnt so much over the last 2 years. And by moving this on and coming back to it later, I think that's what it adds to this, as a quality to the decision making. So thank you to the Minister for accepting the reference back, and thank you for Deputy Tanya to bringing it. Thank you, sir.
Councillor St John.
Thank you, sir. And I also thank the Minister for accepting the reference back. Part of the proposal was around the lack of information. And in terms of information missing, I would remind the Minister that again we see stack minutes 13 weeks behind. The last published stack minutes are the 12th of July. We were told this would improve with the change of chair, but unfortunately it hasn't changed. Deputy Morel spoke about confidence, and we've just heard Deputy Ward speaking about bringing people with us. Sir, if we publish the stack minutes in a much more timely manner, we will not only help to boost the confidence by sharing information, but we'll also improve the trust and bring people with us. I implore the Minister to get stack minutes published in a more timely manner, and thank you for accepting the reference back. Thank you.
Deputy Southern.
So the Minister has agreed, thankfully, to come back with further information. 2 questions remain. One, what sort of timescale does he envisage to report back for the reference back? And secondly, will he include in that assessment how well or badly things have gone in the previous iteration of these emergency powers?
Thank you. Well, the Minister's already spoken, but I'm sure he'll take those on board in his communications with members on this. Chief Minister.
Yes, thank you, sir. I note the Health Minister has accepted the reference back. What I wanted to address, sir, I'm hearing comments in various speakers talking about a power grab. Deputy Tadier said something along the lines of, even if we do accept that the legislation was necessary, which was essentially casting doubt that the legislation was necessary. And I'd also like to address the comment made by, oh, we'll have greater certainty in January. What I want to say, sir, is that, and I think other than what would appear from those comments amongst certain members in the Assembly, that certainly the feedback I get from many islanders is that we are in about as best a place as we could possibly be through an awful lot of very good and hard work, not only by members of this Assembly, but by all of the teams that have come together to bring us to this position. Deputy Tadier seemed to be regretting that we had to, I think his word was cancel Christmas. Well, sir, the point about all those times was we had information changes on this pandemic very quickly. And what I will say, we all regretted the actions we had to take at that point, but we did not see a surge after Christmas, and that was important. Surges tended to translate into deaths without a vaccination program in place. I didn't speak to the members of the public in the Royal Square, and whether it was yesterday or the more recent one, which were anti-vaccination, as far as I'm aware. That is their perfect right. What I do regret, sir, is that obviously the statistics are to date, sir, that if you are not vaccinated, you have a far higher risk of ending up in hospital and therefore a far higher risk of death. And we have seen that in the island, sir. What I wanted to very much address is people and members are looking for certainty. And all I can tell you that is certain is that we won't have certainty, and we won't have certainty in January, and we won't have certainty in February. From memory, sir, we were told about the Delta variant. I think London, if I recall, closed its railway stations at a day's notice. There was a rush to the railway stations to leave London just before Christmas. I think my dates are right, so I haven't gone back and checked. But it then turned out that Delta had been around for a number of months. The concern is that whilst we are in a very good place right as of today, winter is coming. Winter and flu season tends to be any time onwards, but particularly January, February, March, as I understand it. And if, for example, that there seems to be an expectation because of a lower immunity, because everybody has been wearing masks and less interaction, that flu season could be harder this year, which is why we're very keen that everybody does take a flu jab that can. But the other unknown is that there is still a sizable part of this planet who haven't even had their first jab. There are also unknown and further data keeps emerging about the overall duration of the efficacy of the vaccinations that we have, which is why we're talking about boosters. So the period I just want to make down, sir, and in response to some of the comments made by members, actually, sir, it's addressing some of the comments made by members during the reference back, sir. It's about certainty. And we will have, we will be unlikely to have the level of certainty that members will want. All we do know, sir, is that whatever date we pick on, is that the legislation, the overall enabling legislation that allows the regulation to be put in place, and the health minister's laid out exactly the benefits, or depending on your viewpoint, otherwise of those regulations. The overall enabling law, which is what this is about, expires on the 31st of March. And so it's a 6-week lodging period on this. That means it's middle of February, and obviously the decision needs to be made before then to get it lodged in time. So the idea, sir, was to at least give some clarity as to where we were, to then essentially place it into the hands of a future assembly, and hopefully, sir, by that point we will have a greater level of certainty. But the point I was making, sir, a large proportion of this planet is not yet vaccinated. It does give scope for variants to emerge, and it may well be that if a new variant emerges that isn't affected by the vaccine, that one would have to move swiftly again. We are not out of it. We are in a very good place. the Western world, certainly Europe and UK, are in a very good place. There are other parts of this planet that are not. And again, sir, I do take issue with the comment, I think it's by Deputy Tadier, even if we have to accept whether this was necessary or not, the overall deaths last year in 2020 were less than previous years. But actually, if you look, and I don't like doing research by Google, so this was very, very quick, sir. I think the UK flu deaths in 2019 were around 1,200. And on the 31st December 2020, just under 1,000 people died on that one day in the United Kingdom from a COVID-related death. I hope that brings to home, sir, the fact that actually the measures we have been taking have been serious, have been necessary, and in my view, we will continue to take those actions necessary to do, hopefully, as well as we have done to date, about protecting lives and livelihoods. And I really do not take kindly to the assertions or aspersions that that has not been our top priority, sir. Thank you.
Councillor St Martin.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to publicly thank the Health Minister for accepting the reference back and allowing the Assembly and the public to have more clarity on this. Thank you.
Deputy Pamplin.
Thank you, sir. To speak quickly, may I also add with the growing list of requests in the reference back that the Minister provides a full briefing now. I think it's been a long time since all States members gathered together to hear from his officers, policy officers, Dr. Muscat, because I think a lot of information has been spoken about in this debate, which I think it's appropriate ahead of the winds coming, that we have a full briefing now, because I think it's essential. I will point out, obviously, that the Health Scrutiny Panel and the other panels have been meeting for briefings every other week, which has proved helpful. But I would just add that to the request, because I concur with what the Chief Minister said. But, you know, we are entering a time that will be anxious for everybody. We see there's 7 people in hospital currently with
right. I think I'll have to do. I don't know what the hell's going on.
Sorry, Deputy. Chief Minister, I think your mic is still live.
Oh, apologies, sir. I was muttering at a computer rather than, as I hasten to add, technology.
Deputy Pamplin, do you want to carry on?
No, that's fine. I'm sure the Chief Minister was just simply agreeing with every word I was saying. So I would just add that.
Sir.
Thank you. So I hope that makes sense.
I think if that mic could be muted, Chief Minister, that would be helpful. Deputy Pamplin.
And with that, I just add that to the request that we have a full briefing as in support of this reference back. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak on the reference back? If no other member wishes to speak on the reference back, I will call Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. The Chief Minister is a skilled and experienced orator and statesman, so he knows how to address points that I made in a previous debate that were not relevant to the reference back. And what I will say is that I think he's been laying it on a bit thick. I started off my point in the reference back by thanking and congratulating all of our public sector and all of the frontline staff, whether or not they work in the public sector, for their hard work and for keeping us safe during the pandemic. And I've not said that I don't think that COVID was highly serious and that we needed a response to it. And I think the Chief Minister may have misunderstood when I was talking really about some of the specific measures that have been taken, that the legislation has allowed. It's only going to be with hindsight that we can judge these, and it won't happen immediately. And there are going to be massive consequences throughout the world, including, I suspect, a whole raft of civil legal battles arising from COVID and the restrictions that have been put on people and the restrictions of civil liberties because of that. And so we won't know this for some amount of years. And what I've simply said is that also we won't know the harm benefit analysis and some of the unintended consequences of the restrictions that have been put on people. Let's bring this back to what it's really about. It's about fundamentally, humans only have a certain amount of time on this earth. If you're lucky, it's going to be about 80 years. Some people it's much less. And I fundamentally believe that people have the right to go about their lives peacefully and to pursue happiness and to enjoy themselves where that doesn't encroach on other people. And of course, as a state, we try and keep people safe, and we should take that fine line very carefully. The point, as I've made, has to be that we are now in a very different scenario than we were 18 months ago, when we were asked to pass these emergency powers. And so for the minister to say simply that, you've passed these powers before, I'm only just asking you to pass them again so we can keep people safe, is a completely different ask, without the information that I've sought and which other members have also asked for, including other information, which the minister has agreed to provide. And whilst I do thank the minister for accepting the reference back, I also think it's wise of him to do that rather than risking this being kicked out today, because there have been a number of voices, not just my own, who have raised serious concerns about the pathway forward. And I would simply add that I want to get back to a position of normal life, because at the moment there is some kind of metaphorical sword of Damocles holding over people's heads, where people don't know. The minister talked about not having certainty, but we often hear people from the ministers, chief ministers, political persuasion saying that businesses need certainty, but also people need certainty and they need stability in life. And when you don't know whether or not you're going to be able to see a loved one in a different country, because all of a sudden the travel regulations may change, or the borders may close, or certain individuals may not be able to travel for certain reasons, then that isn't allowing people to get on with their ordinary enjoyment of everyday life, sir. And that's why we have to take these powers very seriously, not simply rubber stamp them, and to ask for the information that I've sought, sir. I'll leave that there, sir, because I think hopefully most members will support the reference back. And I will reserve my position, of course, for when the information does come back as to whether I feel that I can support what the minister is proposing at that time. Thank you.
Thank you. Now come to a vote on the reference back, and I will ask the greffier to put a link into the chat. The link is available. Votes on the reference back. I'll ask members to cast their votes. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. And the proposition, the reference back vote, 38 votes per, 2 votes contra and 1 abstention, with 3 additional votes per in the chat. So the proposition has been referred back to the minister accordingly.
Could we have
May
the
we have-
one, please?
Sorry, wait.
See if you can read the 2 and the 1.
Okay, those voting contra, Deputy Young and the Conotop of St Clement, and Deputy Ash abstained.
Thank you very much. The next proposition is the draft COVID-19 amendments, further extensions, Jersey Regulations 2000, P84, lodged by the Minister for Health and Social Services. And I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft COVID-19 amendments, further extensions, Jersey Regulations 2000. The states make these regulations under Article 2 of the COVID-19 Enabling Provisions, Jersey Law 2020.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. And these are the regulations that the Assembly has made, the subordinate legislation, which are the ways in which we have managed and controlled the spread of COVID in our island. And what this debate is about is whether this Assembly wishes to extend the emergency legislation, regulations, for a limited period. So the time frame to this is that well, we had the enabling law and emergency regulations passed in March 2020. Those regulations to expire on the 30th of September 2020. We're still not out of the pandemic, so it was extended by the Assembly for a further 7 months that time to expire on the 30th of April this year. But we extended again for a further 6 months to expire on the 31st of October, that imminent date. So today I'm asking for a third extension for a period of 6 months to expire on the 30th of April 2022. And since we last had an extension debate, we've passed one further set of regulations which provides for sittings of the Electoral College to take place virtually. Otherwise, all the other regulations I'm asking for an extension have been extended previously and of course passed by this Assembly. But the vast majority of those regulations are either suspended by ministerial order or they require orders to be made to have any effect. And this is where the distinction comes in between the situation right at the beginning of the pandemic and the situation we're in now. Right at the beginning, many of these regulations were in operation, the most drastic being the lockdown. Now, we have very few. What we do have, the main ones are screening, assessment and isolation regulations, which allows us to conduct tests at the borders and underpins the safer travel policy. And in the workplace restrictions regulations, that provides for contact details to be given at certain venues and the wearing of masks on public transport. And really, I think those are the principal areas in which our life is at the moment affected. And I wish to remind members that before any powers are revived under regulations, there are a number of requirements. Firstly, that a minister, and yes, it is usually the Minister for Health, must be satisfied that any order is necessary and proportionate, having regard to the foreseeable risk of infection. And to that end, I of course take advice from our medical experts, including Dr. Muscat. And that is indeed the second requirement, that I must take advice from the Medical Officer of Health. And the third requirement, I must consult with the Council of Ministers. And all that has always happened whenever any order has been made under these regulations. So to turn to the proposition, sir, as in previous extensions, this proposition gives an overview of all the emergency subordinate legislation this Assembly has passed. So we could have brought forward dozens of individual regulations asking for an extension of each and every regulation, but we've done this in one proposition rather than in a piecemeal fashion. And the main objective is to ensure that all these disparate pieces of legislation are treated in a consistent manner, with powers relinquished to the greatest possible degree where it's safe to do so, because we've no wish and have no intention to restrain or to retain restrictions on personal liberty for any longer than necessary. We're now moving into a phase, as members have said, where COVID must become a risk to live with rather than a threat that requires the suspension of everyday life. I absolutely agree with that, but in my view, it still requires some limited degree of control to prevent the spread of infection, and it must have the flexibility to allow government to respond to any outbreak that we may see, and to be able to contact trace and try and control the outbreak and prevent further spread and harm to the community. We know that winter could be a time of greatest danger because people gather indoors, it's a party season, people perhaps do not ventilate their environments as they would in the summer. We know as well that new COVID variants can emerge and from abroad can enter the island, perhaps even before their characteristics can be fully studied. So we need to retain the flexibility to respond to that, but at the same time we are constantly monitoring whether we still need the controls that are presently in place, and where the advice is that we no longer need such, then the order is made that they are suspended. And most of this legislation is suspended, but we simply are asking for the renewal of the ability to bring it back should circumstances require. So as I said, sir, this would extend the lifetime of all the legislation listed for another 6 months to the 30th of April next year. I hope it will gain the support of members. Thank you, sir. I propose the principles.
Thank you. The principle seconded.
Yes, sir.
Before we start the debate, Deputy Tadyer, you have a question to the Attorney General.
Yeah, I did. I think I'm going to leave that and maybe just ask if I can speak, because I think the Minister's probably addressed this. So is that okay? Or is anyone else before me?
Yes, I mean, generally if people want to ask a question of the AG, it's good if they have a question for the AG rather than not. But Deputy Tadyer, if you wish to speak, that's fine.
Thanks. Sorry, I did have a question, but I think I don't need to ask that now. I mean, from what I've heard from the Minister is that there's no difference in this proposition to the last one, in the sense that exactly the same comments that I would have made earlier apply to this proposition. And I take on board the Minister saying that he doesn't want to restrict people's civil liberties, but this, by passing this today, this would allow him to do exactly that. And as I've said, I think all of the comments I made on the last piece that we've passed or referred back apply to this one, sir. And I would seek exactly the same information on this proposition that I asked for on the last one, because including the human rights implications for this are exactly the same as in the last proposition, and they're absent, sir. So I think just for logic, as well as because it's important, I need to refer this back as well, please.
Well, Deputy, I'm not sure you can, because Standing Order 83 2 says that the presiding officer shall not allow a proposal that a proposition be referred back if the effect would be to prevent the debate on the proposition resuming at the future meeting. Now, this proposition requires things to happen. It extends deadlines from the end of this month, and the next meeting of the Assembly is next month. So I think that means you can't ask for a reference back in those circumstances because of the time implications of the current proposition.
Okay, sir. So if I can just add then, I'll be voting against this. I think I've made all the comments in the previous speech. I noticed that other members have raised similar concerns, and for that reason, I will also be voting against this proposition unless I hear something that changes my mind. But that's my position. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? If no other member wishes to speak.
Southern just may not be very quick at typing. I say it.
Deputy Higgins.
Thank you, sir. While I feel the state's made the right decision on the previous proposition, I'm not so sure that we should not approve these measures at the moment. What we're going to have before the next state sitting is a briefing from the Health Minister to go through all the concerns that members have got. And if members feel that it wasn't satisfactory, then we are quite capable of bringing a proposition not to reintroduce these or to cancel anything that we approve today. I think that we should bear in mind we are still in the pandemic. Things could happen over the next 3 or 4 weeks before the next stage sitting. Who knows? And the point is, I don't think we should be that reckless just cast them all away without having the briefings that we've been promised and can make an informed decision. So I would urge members on this particular one, let's approve it. I'm not happy about these things either, going on forever, but at the same time, let's have our briefings. And if we feel they're not reasonable, then we can actually bring propositions to change how we go forward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Deputy Southern.
And briefly, sir, yet another reason. So there's a reference back ruled out, not to be debated, rightly or wrongly. But another reason why we should be meeting more often than once every 3 weeks, because we ain't going to meeting till 4 weeks' time. Absolute nonsense. No way to run an island. Never mind a woke stall.
Deputy of St Mary.
Thank you, sir. I do see a distinction between this proposition and the previous one, because unless this one is carried, if not this time, on the next sitting, we'll be out of time. The point I do make is whenever that debate takes place, will the Minister confirm or give some assurance undertaking that before making orders, he will, as on previous occasions, do his utmost to consult not only with scrutiny but with the Assembly? And I seem to recall that certainly in respect of the safer travel policy, there was one proposition passed which required an order to first come to the Assembly. Would he comment on giving such matters favourable consideration in the next phase, as it were? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor St John.
Thank you, sir. And I will be voting to support this proposition. I think we need to continue with the provisions we've got. I just wasn't happy with going as far as July with the previous debate. I would, however, sir, repeat my request for the publishing of stack minutes. I know the Minister was unable to answer my point in the previous debate, but I hope you'll address that in his summing up. Thank you.
Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. And I do see a distinction between this, the P84 and P83. P83 was a much greater principle, the way in which we are enabling government to pass laws in general. These are specifics that have been in place, many of them suspended, some extended, in terms of mitigation factors that we're putting in place now while we are still in a pandemic. And I think that's very important. I will say that many of these are suspended, and I think this is the right time for principals to ask this question rather than the regulations, which are more specific on each part. And I would say to the Minister, those that remain suspended, and there are many that remain suspended, and I would agree with that. What's the mechanism that the Minister sees as, I don't even know if this is a word, unsuspending those regulations, and does that come back to the Assembly? Because unfortunately we get to the point raised by my colleague Deputy Southern about 3 week sittings, which in real terms is a 4 weeks sitting before the next sitting, because of half term, I think it is. So there is not another sitting in October, it is in November, which I think is something we need to be really aware of when we have these, which are seen as emergency regulations. So we are being asked to extend them further, many of which are extending the suspension of regulations, not a problem with, but also some of which are being applied slightly differently now, such as, and I don't know if I need to speak to on this on the regulation, so stop me if I do so, I'll absolutely accept that. Workplace restrictions, no, it wasn't workplace restriction, it was the social distancing and the gatherings to limit the spread of COVID is extended to the 30th of April. And I would say, I'm just wondering whether that fits with where we are currently in terms of the way in which we are behaving across the island, because I'm not seeing distancing, etc., going on. So if we're going to extend something that is not being applied, I would like to know where that fits in, because we're getting a little confused again. But other than that, sir, I think it's an important point to see this as separate from the previous set of regulations, or P83 that we were looking at. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? If no other member wishes to speak on the principles, I close the debate and I ask the Minister to respond.
Thank you, sir, and I thank members for their contributions, and I've noted them all down. To Deputy Tadier, I note that he wants to vote against this because he believes regulations restrict civil liberties, but to which I'd say, well, doesn't any law or regulation we pass in this assembly contain some restrictions? It's a question of proportionality. Does the deputy really think that 18 months ago it would have been safe not to impose any restrictions on the grounds of civil liberties and ensuring? What about the question of people dying? Because we would have chosen to undertake, to put in place absolutely no controls. So it's a case of what is proportionate, and we don't know exactly what the next 6 months will bring. What this proposition is asking is that we have the tools to be able to respond to any surprises, emergencies that arise in the next 6 months. And I hope the deputy would understand that and allow that to proceed to keep our island safe and not to take risks. Deputy Higgins has asked for a briefing from us. I will arrange, all that is required by the reference back. Members have been receiving emails throughout the summer recess with a lot of detail in. I've been meeting with the scrutiny panels also, and we've said that we're going to have a briefing on our winter strategy, which is we're discussing this afternoon, if we get there actually, as ministers, and then we will put it before members in a briefing. So we'll cover all those points that have been asked today. So Deputy of St Mary asked what happens before making the orders. I think I covered that in my speech, that I have to be satisfied it's necessary and proportionate, that I must take advice from the Medical Officer of Health, and the matter has to go before the Council of Ministers for consultation. But in addition, I think it is under the workplace restriction regulations that there is a specific requirement, if possible. I think it's in case there was an emergency, I couldn't reach the chair of the scrutiny panel, Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel, I would be able to make the order, but I think it says where possible I must consult with the scrutiny chair and panel. I think the Deputy St Mary also asked, would I consult with the Assembly before making the order? But I think if the Assembly wants a debate before an order is made, perhaps it shouldn't give me an order-making power. The order-making powers are really there for emergency situations, and the need becomes apparent, doesn't it? I don't make orders in some vacuum. If there's an emergency that's building up within the island, we're all talking about it. I'm receiving loads of emails. We're arranging briefings, and we've had meetings of this assembly to discuss policy issues and responses that we've all wanted to give and had different ideas. So this assembly, I believe, has been heavily engaged in our COVID response far more engaged than I think the House of Commons has been and some other assemblies around the world. To the Constable of St John on the stack minutes, I certainly will chase. I will just say that stack have not been meeting weekly as they used to, because, well, quite frankly, we're in a situation where we have some stability at the moment, and stack have not needed to meet each week. But there are some minutes outstanding, it appears, and I will chase them. And I'll always do my best to ensure that they are available. Deputy Ward asked what was the mechanism to bring orders into force, and I think I've just explained that. Specifically about the social distancing and gathering regulations, they're not in force at the moment. They were suspended, but it is a regulation that I think we should keep in reserve should we need to say over winter time we're in a position where we need to ask people to keep 1 metre or 2 metres apart in queues and the like, or we ask people not to gather together in large parties. I hope, sincerely hope, we don't get to that position. But to do it at the moment would be entirely disproportionate. And there's no suggestion that we now restrict gatherings or enforce social distancing. So what is in force at the moment is really very limited. And I think the island has come to understand and is operating under these COVID restrictions well. And I think are pleased that we have them to the extent that we still have some control over the border, that we are able to test, trace and isolate positive cases. I think that's important and the community still understands. So I hope that's answered queries, sir, and I would hope to gain the support of the Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll ask the greffier to put a link in the chat channel for the vote on the principles. The link is available, so I ask members to cast their votes. All members have had the opportunity to cast their votes. I will ask the greffier to close the voting. Principle's been adopted. There were 40 votes per, 2 votes contra, and 1 abstention in the link, and 3 additional votes per chat. So that's 43 to 2 with 1 abstention.
Can we have the 2 and the 1, please, sir?
Those voting contra, the Connétable of St Brelard and Senator Moore, and Deputy Tadier abstained.
Deputy Hegra, this piece of legislation falls to your panel. Do you wish to call it in?
No, thank you, sir.
Minister, when we come to the regulations, you have an amendment. Would you like to take the regulations as amended by your own amendments? Is there
If I may, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Is there any objection to that course of action? Don't detect any objection. Therefore, they can be taken as amended. How do you wish to proceed with them?
So if I may, I'd like to propose the regulations en bloc and try and answer any individual questions from members if they have any. Thank you.
Are the regulations seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the regulations? Deputy Ward.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I've got a few questions regards to regulation, simply because of where we are now with, it was what I alluded to when I talked on the principles. A number have been suspended and a number have been extended, and I just want to understand to some extent what that means. I start with one that's been suspended, Regulation 8, in terms of, sorry, let me get the document up so I can read the actual words. Apologies, so just give me 1 second. Regulation 8 has been suspended, which is the regulation of care. I just want to check that that means that we're going back to the normal system of inspection of care homes with the Care Commission, etc., etc. And because that is suspended, we wouldn't, again, it's just at what point that may become in place again, because suspension does not mean removal. It means it is possible in the future. Now, I understand that depends on the pandemic, but that was one that I had, personally, I had real trouble with. I think I may have voted against that before, in terms of care homes. In terms of those that have been extended, in particular, just written a few things down here, sir. The safe distancing, it says that extended but independent of offences in force. Does that mean that it's just, if you like, semi-suspended in the background? And this is what I don't quite get about some of this, and I'd just like some clarity. The safe distancing is being extended, but we're not imposing a 2-metre distancing anymore within our society, not that I am seeing. And so what does that mean? It's also about the restricted movement of 5 under Regulation 5 has been extended, but it's not enforced. Now, I can sort of understand that that is separate from enforcing to have the regulation in the background. However, I just don't understand how those two things fit together, because I think it gives it a lack of clarity. And should we be in a position where that safe distance one effectively is being suspended, but not in this current amendment? There's also, sir, the thing about number 3, let's try and do these in order, about the courts. I see that that provision is extended, but I will note that the public gallery is open in this assembly. So I wonder whether it's necessary to extend the courts regulations where we are now. Workplace restrictions, number 5, are extended. Capacity to make workplace restrictions. And I think I may be slightly answering my own question, sir, and it might help the Minister. And if I am, just say, yes, that's exactly what it means. That's fine. This is genuinely about clarity. The workplace restriction order is in place that requires businesses to close to the public or operate in certain ways. Is that commonly being applied, and how is that being applied? Because we're not seeing a lot of restrictions in shops and in businesses and so on. But I have had people speak to me in barbers, for example, saying that they were visited by the, as they refer to, their words not mine, the COVID police, who are quite harsh with them. And I think what we don't want is an inconsistency. We want to make sure we understand what we're voting for today and what that's going to look like. Similar with construction work, number 6, and number 7, which are the COVID gatherings, restriction in size. There are large gatherings that we had them in the Royal Square on fabulous corn rights events, where I'll add there was some fantastic music as well, on some days in particular. But there were many people there, and there wasn't restriction. What I'm asking the Minister, sir, is to just give some clarity in the way us extending these today are fitting into the actual practicality of what we're seeing day to day, because in my mind it's not fitting. And if you can say, well, look, what we need to do is extend these so that they're in the background in case, then I sort of get that, and I support that, but we do need some clarity about how they're going. So sorry, this is rather long, but I'll try and do it all in one go, and I think it's important if we're going to vote on something like this. Number 9 on statutory nuisance, events of such size or duration and held in such circumstances as to create a nuisance I would have thought this was general law rather than needed for COVID law. COVID, particularly in the position that we're in now, I don't understand how that one. I don't know if I can vote for that one, to be quite frank, but you're taking them on block, so it does create a problem. Other than that, sir, I think with the wills, number 10 is fine. The civil partnerships remain partly suspended. Amendments, effective treatment of civil partnership, and I think so. My panel has looked at that. I'm not entirely sure why that is necessary, but partly suspended. If you could explain that, that would be great. And the final one, sorry, so I'm losing my flow a little bit here. It's always difficult when you talk about regulations. Is number 19, which is unlawful public entertainments, Jersey. And I think that is more relevant to the corn rights, for example, and events that are going on around the island, which is great. If they're in the open air, I can understand why they're accessible. That was time limited by my panel, actually. I remember the amendment now, looking back to P103. This will be time limited again until April 2022. I just, again, when we're extending these, can you explain the link between the enforcement of them and how that's going to happen? Because we're going to extend the ability to enforce something and it's not being enforced. And to me, that seems to be a suspension rather than an extension of that power. I may have read it wrong, but if you could explain that, sir. And I apologise to the Minister if that doesn't make any sense. And if it does, then well done to the Minister. Thank you very much.
Principal Simperlard.
Thank you. So I'd just like the Minister to clarify on 14 whether in fact the office of the Superintendent Registrar is open to the public. It seems to me that the ability for the public to examine the registers is still restricted, and perhaps he could clarify if that is the current situation.
Does any other member wish to speak on the regulations? If no other member wishes to speak, I will close the debate and call the Minister.
Thank you, sir. I'll do the best I can to answer both members. So what is meant by extension is asking this assembly to allow the powers contained in these regulations to continue for a further period of 6 months. What is meant by suspension is the exercise of those powers given by this assembly to a few different ministers, but yes, in the main, myself as Health Minister. So I think as Deputy Ward answered his own question, because I've written down the words he said, extend so they're in the background in case we need. And that's precisely the position. They will exist in the background for a further 6 months in case we need them. So they're on our statute books for 6 months, but they're not in force because the Assembly has said in the regulation that to come into force, the Minister must make an order where it's proportionate to do so, and he follows all those safeguards I've mentioned, and where it ceases to be appropriate, where it becomes disproportionate, the Minister must suspend the order he makes. And that is why most of these regulations are in the background. They're not in current force because it is no longer proportionate to have them. And that applies to many of those specific ones that Deputy Ward mentioned. So the regulation on care homes, Regulation 8, standards and requirements. I remember those debates, and that was certainly a difficult one, but that's not in force and there hasn't been an order implementing that regulation for some time. It was only in place for a short time, thankfully. It was necessary because the Care Commission need to inspect care homes, and care homes can only operate as a result of those inspections, but it was necessary because there was risk about bringing people into those care homes. There was risk to the Care Commission staff, risk to the staff and residents of care homes. So that procedure was suspended on advice, but an alternative procedure put in place, which I remember the deputy saying wasn't a great procedure. It was to be done virtually, effectively. So the Care Commission was still doing the job it could in the emergency circumstances. But perhaps I don't need to go into detail because that is suspended. I don't foresee it being brought back into force. But of course, that's the point of this procedure, that we don't know what's ahead. Should we get into that very serious situation, we could implement these regulations. Similarly, with Regulation 2, safe distancing is not in force. Regulation 5, the workplace restrictions. There's quite a few controls in that. Amongst them were the closure of business premises, so that at one time there were quite a significant number that could not operate, could not open to the public, and gradually we reduced that list so that now all businesses can operate. There's no legal restriction because that part of the regulation is suspended. But there are certain parts that are still in force, which is about requiring some businesses to take our contact details and requiring face masks to be worn on public transport. Those are the two areas in the workplace regulations that are still in force, and I think should remain still in force. As to the COVID police, as Deputy Ward has said, this is in fact our health and safety team. It's been supplemented during COVID by extra persons who have done a great job going around businesses advising on methods to keep people safe. And it is advisory at the moment because it's guidance that they are asking businesses to enforce or to put in place. And they've had great reception from businesses, particularly during the time of opening up when there was a confusion and some fear. They've helped businesses put in place measures which have allowed us to feel safe when we go out to a restaurant or to the arts centre or different places. And I give credit to that team who have worked hard in difficult situations. The Regulation 3 about the courts, I think this has allowed, would still allow the courts to sit in different places. So I know the court has sat up at the RJA and HS because there was space to distance. If the court felt it still wished to, on any one occasion, it would be able to. But I think it's the case that the public can still attend court hearings. I would hope so. It may be that they have to give names and contact details. The Regulation 6, the construction regulations, are not in force. That was specifically about how construction work might proceed when there was a great fear about people working in close environments, close contact environments. It's not in force. Our COVID safe team has again helped lots of building firms to operate in a safe manner. Regulation 7 on gatherings, again, those are not in force. One of the most difficult discussions we had about amongst ministers was that regulation that limited the numbers of people that could gather in a private home. So that if I was having a family celebration, a family big birthday or something, we limited people to 10 in their own home at one time, and it became 20, and now there's no limit. We fully understood that that was an imposition, and that was we were advised that it was necessary and proportionate, because you can't, unlike in a business, you can't go round and check on what is happening. And that is where we saw outbreaks occurring as a result of private parties. So for a time, it was necessary to have that restriction, much as we disliked it. But it's not enforced now. But I'm asking that just in that case we need it, based on experience in the past and those spikes we saw arising from private parties, that we could have the ability to restrict, much as I would rail against it and really press if we had to. But if we have to keep the island safe, we need to. Regulation 9, statutory nuisance, is there is another substantive law, a permanent law on statutory nuisances, which is administered by the Environment Minister. This one was a specific amendment to that law, introduced at the beginning of COVID, to include as a statutory nuisance events of such size or duration, and is held in such circumstances as to create that nuisance. I'm not sure, in fact, I don't think, it's the Environment Minister who has responsibility for that, but I don't think it has been used, because there were other measures that were used to the gathering control regulations to restrict events of size and duration. I'm sorry, I think Deputy Ward spoke about civil partnerships, and I rather lost the thread. I'm sorry.
It's okay, I think I know the answer somewhere.
Okay. Finally, Deputy Ward asked about unlawful public entertainment regulations, and a link between enforcement. I think this is to do with bailiff's permit, and I believe it is to allow the bailiff to withdraw a permit allowing public entertainment, having granted one, if circumstances had changed in the interim and the bailiff, again acting on advice, believed that there was a risk to public health, and therefore the entertainment should not proceed. Like all these things, there's going to be a time limitation on this to the 30th of April. The Constable of St. Brelard, sir, asked whether the office of the Superintendent Registrar was open. I don't know absolutely currently, but I know it has been closed. I've not personally been made aware of it opening, because this falls under the remit of the Minister for Home Affairs. If it's not open, it would be because of measures needed to keep the workforce and visitors safe in there, and other means will have been created to allow the statutory functions of that office to take place, in the same way that we have taken measures to keep members of this assembly safe. We would expect workforces to do so as well, and within government departments too. But I will make inquiries, and I will undertake to get back to the Constable of St. Brelard. I hope that's answered the queries as best as I can, sir, and thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Norman de Greffier will put a link to a vote on the regulations as amended. in the chat channel. The link is available, so I ask members to cast their votes. All members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. And ask the greffier to close the voting. The regulations have been adopted. 40 votes per, 1 vote contra, 1 abstention, and 2 additional votes per in the chat.
So can we have the contra and the abstain, please?
Deputy Tadia abstained.
Again.
And the Conotab of St Brelard. And
was just
that it? That was
it. Was just the one.
Was the contra.
Minister, do you wish to take the matter forward in third reading?
If I can propose the third reading, sir, and thank officers who worked on this complex piece of legislation, but also thank all the teams working in our COVID response. It's been difficult for them. It's been difficult for the whole population, but they've given us good advice and good guidance. Thank you, sir.
Are the regulations seconded in third reading?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on third reading? If no member wishes to speak, we'll move straight to a vote. And I will ask the greffier to put a link. The link is available. We'll vote on third reading. If all members have had the opportunity to cast their votes, I'll ask the greffier to close the voting. And the regulations have been adopted in third reading. 38 votes per, 2 votes contra, 1 abstention, and an additional 2 votes per in the chat.
Can we have the 2 and the 1 again, just to confirm consistency? Thank you.
The abstention was Deputy Tadia, and the contra, the Conotab of St Brelard, and also Senator Moore.
Thank you very much. The final proposition on the order paper is the draft COVID-19 Employment Minimum Wage Jersey Regulations 2000, P85, lodged by the Minister for Social Security. I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft COVID-19 Employment Minimum Wage Jersey Regulations 2000, The states make these regulations under Article 2 of the COVID-19 Enabling Provisions Jersey Law 2020.
Minister.
Thank you. Yes, the employment law requires me to direct the employment forum to consult businesses and other organisations and individuals about the level of the minimum wage and then report these recommendations to me. Unfortunately, due to COVID and most businesses being shut or just like clinging on to survival, they couldn't go out and it actually would not have been safe to do so. So my officers in between the COVID, when it was lifting a little bit, did their own consultation. They did contact and put out for people to contact them, all the same organisations that the Employment Forum would do, the unions, etc., etc. And we had some really, really good responses. I wrote to states members twice for individual for some input, because it just wasn't about the minimum wage, sir. It was also to see if we are doing it right. Is it the Employment Forum the right body to do this, etc., and is it at the right time, and should they do it more than once or do it every year or not? And there was a lot more of that to come, but the employment, the majority of people who came back said they want, and I agree, that it is going to be the Employment Forum from now on, because it, you know, the broad spectre of the people who are on the Employment Forum. So they came, my officers came back, and the way we are asking to do it is to use a small COVID regulation, so I can set the minimum wage. I won't be setting the minimum wage with the regulations. If I'm allowed to use the regulations today, in the next few days, I will lay an order with the minimum wage on it. And that's how it's been, how it will have to be done. The regulations, the small COVID regulations, will be out of date by the 1st of April next year. And just to explain again, sir, I was slightly late in lodging this, and this was because the up-to-date figures I had, if I'd have lodged this on time, was the average wage up until June, and I wanted to see what the average wage was in August, because we have a long-standing commitment from P121 2017 to try and get the minimum wage at 45% of the average earnings, and it would have been out. The figure I had before that was lower because the average earnings were higher, so it was lodged a week late, but we have finally got there, and it is a year late. The proposition asked that we got to 45% of the average earnings by 2020, but we all know what happened in 2020, but we have got there. So I make the principle, sir.
Are the principles seconded? Yes, sir. Thank you. Constable Greville.
Thank you, sir. I'm fully in favour of this proposition because obviously the proper consultation or the normal consultation process couldn't take place. So I think the Minister is quite right in bringing this forward. Looking through the report, however, her proposal to introduce a minimum wage of £9.22 in January is of great concern to the agricultural community. There's also an issue about the freezing of the benefits in kind, which I have discussed with the Minister, and I know she's willing to have further conversations on that matter. But going back to the £9.22, sir, I should really say from the outset, I'm retired from agriculture, although obviously that is my background. I have minimalist activities in agriculture, and I don't employ anybody, and I don't receive any government support. But this level of minimum wage will have a massive impact on the growing sector. The dairy sector is slightly different. It doesn't really employ any low-skilled workers, probably very few, if any. It also has a slightly higher price of milk in Jersey than in the UK.
which enables the dairy industry to pay probably higher than the wages that may be paid in the UK. That industry is, in my view, the price of milk is too cheap in the UK, and I don't think it's economically sustainable, and it's certainly not environmentally sustainable. And I would suggest that our dairy industry leads the way in environmental practice and good practice generally. The growing sector is very different. It has a lot of skilled workers in it, but it also has basic labourers, and it's competing in an international marketplace with cheap food from all over the world. You can import fruit and vegetables from Covent Garden probably cheaper than we can produce them here. That's looking at it purely in monetary terms. Environmentally, of course, buying local is the thing to do. This hike in the minimum wage will have a significant impact on the growing sector of the agricultural industry. And I know some discussions have been taking place, and what I'd call upon in this debate is if the Chief Minister, perhaps the Economic Development Minister, can make an assurance that not only will they be talking, but before January, and this wage is brought in, that some progress is being made to mitigate against this really big increase in a minimum wage. Some things could be mechanised, and the industry is mechanising and planting of potatoes, things like that. But our potato, which is very special, is a new potato and requires a lot of handling, basic manual labour. It's not skilled, and we're lucky that we have people that come over, and we've had people from all different countries over the years. The latest from the Philippines who come over, really keen to work on our farms because they earn for them what is really good money, and it's mutually beneficial to both parties, because actually locals don't really want to be doing manual labour, and even if you put the pay up, they wouldn't really want to be doing manual labour. So I'd like an assurance from the Chief Minister before this debate's out that he will take some action. I know there's support throughout this assembly, actually, because I've spoken to people from different parties and who are keen to make sure that we do make sure that our agricultural industry isn't hurt by these quite substantive increases. So I look forward to hearing from the Chief Minister before this debate is out. Thank you, sir.
Constable Simperlard.
Thank you, sir. I would just refer to the 45% target, which I'm aware was endorsed in March 18 by this Assembly. And I'd ask the Minister if she still considers it appropriate, because it seems to me that it is disproportionately skewed by the level of wages, salaries in the finance industry to the industries which quite frankly have difficulty in affording the sort of levels which are being proposed, referred to by previous speaker. The other point, I do wonder why we need to be ahead of everybody else. I can't see the justification for that. With regard to the financial implications, it always amuses me, sir, when it indicates the regulations have no financial implications. Well, there certainly are for a lot of the businesses in the island, and I don't feel the effect on them is being properly considered, especially in these difficult economic times. And finally, so I do wonder how much input the government should have in such things at this present moment, given the situation is that it is very, very difficult to find any staff actually at any level these days, and the market itself is probably the best way that wages can be governed. And if employers don't pay a decent wage, they just simply won't get any staff, and that situation prevails at present. So I'd appreciate the Minister's comments on that. Thank you.
Deputy of St Martin.
Thank you, sir, and I stand to echo the views of both the constables who've spoken before me, but most especially the Constable of Grouville. Like him, I'm a retired farmer. I receive nothing from the state, and I don't farm or run a farm anymore. But the message I wish to concur with is the one to the Economic Development Minister about the growing industry in Jersey. Our members may not know, the Minister may not know, but given the problems with COVID, with Brexit and other pressures on commodities, the price of fertiliser, if you can get it, next season will be probably 3 times what was paid this year, and the plastic to cover the potato crop may not be even available. These are serious concerns for the growing industry, and this price rise proposed by the Minister, while acceptable, and I'm going to vote in favour of it, we must find a way of mitigating this price rise for those people who employ lower paid workers in their industry. They can't stay competitive as things are, and government needs to find a way to help them. We've known for a long time that this industry needs help, and they are getting very little, if anything at all. So I make that plea to the Economic Development Minister to please look at this before 922 comes in next year, and to find a way of looking forward and helping the growing industry in Jersey before it's too late. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Sullivan.
Thank you, sir. And I too am looking forward to hearing from the Economic Development Minister about what in detail he's got in his schemes in order to support agriculture in particular on the island and not rely on the minimum wage, which is an artificial way round of doing things. The facts are that we are finding, like many places, finding it increasing post-Brexit, it's increasingly difficult to get any staff at all to do any low-skilled to work with low-skilled wages. And we have to act on that. I congratulate the Social Security Minister having reached the target of 45% of the average, but I put on notice that actually things have moved on. The proper comparison that we need is a comparison with the mean wage, because that takes into consideration the distribution of wages. And what we're talking about there is 60% of the mean wage is the new target that we should be reaching for, because it's the one that defines the poverty level. And unless we can start to eliminate poverty amongst our workers, whether imported or elsewhere or local, unless we can do that, we're simply not going to be able to run those low-paid sectors. That's what is going to happen. So we have to make a move on that. And I give notice today that as soon as the powers are there and the new figure is lodged, I shall be bringing a proposition to raise it still further. We are committed. We are committed to improving the lot, to removing income imbalance in our society, and we must continue down that path. So look forward to hearing, and today, if possible, the Economic Development Minister or the Chief Minister stating exactly how they will help in our low-paid sectors, particularly our growing industries. Thank you.
Constable Trinity.
Thank you, sir. I'm minded to support the Minister with the proposed increase, but I would like to echo the views of some of the previous speakers in that there is an urgent need to support our growing industry. Throughout the COVID crisis, they were considered as essentially employed, and I think that's the essentially employed is something we should bear in mind, and I would ask the Economic Development Minister to bear that in mind, because it not only supports the local growing industry, which is vital to food supplies within our island, but it actually helps towards our carbon neutrality, or strive towards carbon neutrality of not importing food and vegetables which can be grown sustainably here in the island. So I would like to hear something by way of encouragement from the Economic Development Minister towards this debate. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Taddier.
Thank you, sir. This raises some of the same old arguments that have been put forward in the past. And I think we all know that globally, that when it comes down to true value, it's those who provide food for the planet and for us, and those who build homes to keep people sheltered and deal with water, because those are all the things which are at the bottom of the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of need. Those are the true value adders in our society. And there's an irony that those who work in the food industry, whether they're farmers, if we as we're often told, or indeed the workers that actually toil in the fields are paid the lowest amongst anybody, even though they're the most fundamental to our survival, not just in Jersey, as human beings. And I was quite saddened, as some members will know, that very recently you can add Russian workers to the list of those who are being brought over to Jersey. And in this case, they were being exploited. I have no qualms about saying that. And I caveat that, of course, there are different employers in the industry who have different practices. But from what I saw with these Russian workers who were part of a cohort brought over, is that there's a general trend of a race towards the bottom. And whilst some members in the Assembly might say, well, it's okay to pay these people the minimum wage because it's a lot of money for them and they appreciate it. If we took that to its logical conclusion, we could probably find workers around the world who would be happy to work for less than the minimum wage, because that would be a lot of money for them. And I would question what kind of basis do we want for our agricultural industry, the potato industry in particular, in Jersey? Do we want that to be built on effectively exploited labour when and at poverty wages? And now I know that the argument has been said and will be said, well, it's not poverty wages for them. They get porter cabins with some basic rusty white goods in, which I also saw incidentally, and they're grateful for it because they can save the money up for themselves. What I saw in this case, in fact, was Russian workers who were ostensibly brought over for a 6 to 9 month contract, only to find out that they'd been worked very hard for effectively 3 to 3.5 months, and that they ended up much more out of pocket than they thought, because they had to pay for their own plane fares to come over, which was not unsubstantial, that there were fees they had to pay to agencies, and that in fact that the tax allowances which they should have been allowed, if they calculated it on a 6 to 9 month basis, that they would have had that pro rata, but because they were only working in Jersey, let's say for 3 months, they only had a quarter of their tax allowance, which brought it right down, which means that even though they were earning minimum wage, they ended up paying quite a significant amount of tax compared to somebody who might have been working here for 12 months. And the point also on top of that, I think has to be said, is that people need to go into this with their eyes open, sir. So, and this certainly wasn't the case for them. And I understand the argument. It said that many locals don't want to do this kind of work. Well, I'm not sure that's true. I think if living wages were being paid for some of this work. Oh, and incidentally, that's the other point I was going to make, is that they were also being asked to do, in some cases, 80-hour days. That's paid work. And of course, the days were longer because that didn't take into account the unpaid breaks. So you had these workers at 6:30 in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. And initially, they weren't even offered a day off a week. So they were working for about 3 weeks before they realised that they had a right to ask for a day off and that they were given them. So these are some of the practices that are happening right under our noses in the 21st century in Jersey. And I question whether that's a sustainable, let alone a humane model for that we want to see in our islands industry. So what is the solution to that? Because we know that we have also there are market forces, and I certainly know that in recent times potatoes were effectively or seemingly having to be sold as loss leaders in many of the UK supermarkets, and very small profit margins if they existed at all. And that doesn't seem like a sustainable model. Yet at the same time, we have a question of food security locally. And I would question simply whether or not people just need to pay much more for their produce, be willing to pay much more so that they can pay a decent wages to whoever is working in those fields, whether they're locally sourced or if it's imported labour, sir. But this is the side that doesn't get put forward when we hear the farming lobby talk to us about, I'm sure, how difficult the industry is. And I know farmers myself, and they work very hard. But this is the other side of the coin, and I think that's the concern that we need to also bear in mind when it comes to that section. I wouldn't want to see, for example, a two-tier wage system where we say we aspire to the living wage for all workers, but we have some kind of carve out for an industry to allow that to exist on a minimum or even below minimum wage. And we only need to think back to what happened with Condor Ferries a number of years ago when Senator McLean was at the Economic Development Department trying to defend Condor, who were paying something like £2.50 an hour to their staff through some loophole because they were actually employed in a different country, even though they were really working in between Jersey, France and England. That's the kind of thing which I think our residents don't want to see. And this is what we should all be aspiring to in the search for a living wage. So the living wage should actually be the minimum wage. People should be able to afford to survive in Jersey without resorting to government benefits, and to have that dignity to know that if they work a full week's work, that they will have enough money to at least pay the rent and pay the bills, if not have a little bit more to enjoy themselves. So.
Thank you, Councillor St Mary.
Thank you, sir. I was a bit caught out there. If we are to keep this island functioning to the level which we all expect, then there is no doubt that the minimum wage needs to increase to a realistic figure. We rely heavily on immigrant labour, and probably always will, as many local people will not work the long hours in sometimes very difficult conditions that the immigrant labour are prepared to accept for very little reward. We, like other jurisdictions, now find ourselves in a position where the lower practical skills do not exist due to encouraging our children to be far more academic. We are also in the same position with skilled labour. As an example, the health system, education, the building and mechanical industries, and others. The higher skilled labour market gap is widening as these people have to be poached and offered an inducement in order to employ them. The same will happen with our lower paid workers unless we keep pace with reality. You have to ask yourselves, would you take the low paid work for the minimum wage as it is at present? Would you take the work at the new proposed rate? I am sure that the answer to both would be no. That then should make your decision easy to support this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Right, so we have one more member on the list to speak in this debate at the moment. Deputy Lehegra has called for the adjournment. Other members have suggested that it'd be better to carry on and finish the order paper. It's not my choice, it's your choice. So I can test the views of the Assembly on the adjournment.
Do we know how many other people might want to speak, sir?
Well, nobody else has put their name down.
I'll be very brief, sir.
But Senator Mesnick indicated he might wish to speak.
I think we should adjourn and come back.
Well, I think, sorry, Deputy, I think with a competition of voices here. I think the best thing is for the Assembly to vote on whether or not to adjourn. And if we don't vote to adjourn, naturally we'll have to carry on to the end, I think. So I'll ask the greffier to put a link into the channel for adjournment for lunch. Those members who wish to adjourn now for lunch would vote pour. Those members who wish to carry on to the end of the order paper would vote contre. The link is available, so I ask members to cast their votes.
Yeah.
So it's pour to adjourn, contra not to adjourn. Contra is to carry on.
So in my rush, I have actually voted the wrong way. I wish to vote to adjourn, please.
Are you sure your blood sugar is in the right place, Councillor? So you voted to adjourn. All members have had the opportunity to cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. And the Assembly has voted not to adjourn per 10, contra 26. There were 2 additional votes contra in the chat, and we'll resolve the Constable of Trinity's vote afterwards. But it's very clear that the Assembly wishes to carry on, in which case I call the Constable of St John.
Thank you, sir. The first speech I made in the Assembly was about the minimum wage, and at the time I spoke about agriculture because £1 million had just been committed to a museum for agriculture. I said then, sir, and I'll say again, if we do not help that industry, we may need a larger museum. So we've heard about the environment. We also need to think about food security. That really is important for us. What, if anything, are we going to do to help both agriculture and hospitality? We all want, I think, to support an increase in the minimum wage. But what do we do in terms of supporting these industries? When we compare the support that Jersey offers its farmers, the custodians of our land, compared to other jurisdictions, including the Isle of Man, for example, what do we actually do to help them? And what are we going to do in the future? Deputy Tadyer mentioned tax, and I was surprised around 12 months ago at the level of income tax paid by some of our farm workers, some of those workers who are working those long hours, but they do contribute to tax in many ways. I did speak in my first speech about could we do something with seasonal workers' social security contributions. Often they have private health insurance because they can't claim off of the social security, and I really would like to hear from the Economic Minister and the Social Security Minister to see what they are doing to help these people and these industries. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Higgins.
Thank you, sir. Just following on, the whole question of agricultural wages, assistance to agriculture and so on. The states have constantly looked at this issue, but not with any real data. I've asked repeatedly over the time about the amount of subsidies we give to farmers or what they've been allowed to do with planning, where, for example, they get agricultural buildings and then sell off the older buildings. And then they convert the agricultural buildings into trading things. We need to understand fully what's going on in agriculture. I support it. I believe we're going to have food security. I believe in what they're doing to maintain the countryside, but the states need to get all the data so we can see. It isn't just the question of the wages and they're paying out too much or too little. It's not about the level of profits they're making. We don't have the full picture, and we need to have that before we can ever resolve this issue once and for all. So I ask the ministers, come clean for a change. Rather than giving us piecemeal information, give us the lot that I've asked for in the past. Thank you, sir.
Senator Mezek.
Thank you, sir. Just very briefly, because of course this is a debate about setting the process for setting the minimum wage now, and not the minimum wage itself. And of course, we'll support this proposition to enable the minister to set a minimum wage outside what would have been the ordinary process. That's the right thing to do here, and of course we'll support that. And as Deputy Southern said, that how we look at the minimum wage moving forward does need a proper think. And I would say that the process that has been used up until now can be demonstrated to be broken by the fact that our minimum wage has fallen below our neighbours, including Guernsey, and that we are going to support those industries in our economy that are so important, but most importantly to support people's livelihoods. We are going to need a process for setting the minimum wage that does include some consideration about what the poverty level is in Jersey, and ensuring that if you are in full-time work, you should not be living in poverty. If you're in work, you are worth a living. You are not worth less than it, and that ought to come from your employer. If there's conversations to be had with industries about supporting them to enable that, then let's have those conversations and let's be real about it. But to have to live in poverty when you're in full-time work, or to have to go to the States to subsidise your living costs because your employer is not paying you enough to live on, is a situation that must be abolished in Jersey, because we're a wealthy and affluent island. We're better than that. We can get there, and I look forward, I hope, to what will not be a very long period of time, where our minimum wage will simply be a living wage, and that those in work will have the dignity of knowing that they're being paid an amount that keeps them out of poverty, and that ought to be the future. And so supporting this proposition I see as a step towards that future that I look forward to.
Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? Senator Farnham.
Thank you, sir. A number of members have asked that I comment, and I'm pleased to do so, to reassure members that my department is working on ways to support the industry. In fact, Deputy Morell and I have another briefing on Monday morning scheduled. The cost of a 9.22 wage for the potato sector alone is over £1 million. And members should realise, and I'm sure they do, but as we move towards our quest, which I'm sure most of us support, for a living wage, every pound we put on the minimum wage puts millions of pounds worth of costs onto the payroll of businesses. And we must realise that we have to support those businesses, and that support will take will come in a number of different ways, including productivity support, perhaps increased land area payments, or an alternative form of financial support for the agricultural sector. So, but not just that, tourism, retail, and other sectors who we're going to have to help bridge the gap from minimum to living wage. For minimum to living wage. So when and that might include, and I haven't spoken to the Social Security Minister about this, and our officers haven't yet approached her officers, may well include a request for reduced Social Security contributions for employers in those sectors to help bridge the gap. So when we do come back with support for the sectors, which will probably mean millions of pounds worth of support to help these industries bridge the gap to get to the living wage, I expect and very much hope that all members that are pushing for the living wage will support the way we support them. So I hope that provides some reassurance. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? No other member wishes to speak. I close the debate and call the Minister to respond.
Thank you, and I thank Senator Farnham for stepping in to say that we are well, he's got some ideas. I've heard some of his ideas before, but I do, to all the people who spoke on behalf of the farmers, some knew that it would probably be just around the £9 or just over, and they were concerned about that, but they weren't. So it's not too far. When I was say, we made a commitment in here to get to the 45% of the average earnings in 2020 by 2020, and we couldn't do it because of COVID. Out there in the industries, and it is because of shortage of staff, people are paying more than £9.22 at the moment. But that, you know, we can't carry on like that. We need to make sure that meat places do have staff, because it's not that they literally can't open on some days of the week, and it's not fair to the employees that might be just asked to, you know, work a little bit more another shift. It's if it's in between, if it's in law, that's fine. If it's in, it doesn't abuse the employment law, that's fine. But then again, you know, some people might just be getting a bit too pushed. Deputy Tadier is definitely right. We, myself and I actually couldn't go in the end, but the Home Affairs Minister, we're coming up with some brochures, because it's our international reputation. These workers are coming through the UK on a visa, and if they go back and say they've had a terrible experience in Jersey, we won't get any more. So we need to know their rights. We need to know they're not. I think Deputy Tadier said they were getting part tax. Well, tax is over a year, as far as I know. They shouldn't be taxed for 5 months. If they know their 5 months' wages is going to go over the year, and it's under the taxable, the 16,000, they shouldn't be getting taxed. Yes, they do pay social security. And again, this was a big problem on the population board. People are working on it now. Why would you have to pay social security for 4 years to even then be, you know, later down the line, have a pension? But we're looking at to see if there's a different way we can do it.
Minister, sorry to interrupt. Deputy Tadier has asked whether you would give way at this point for a point of clarification.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. It's just to ask whether the minister is aware or can clarify that that there's a pro rata tax allowance applied. So where a resident who's been here for the whole year and a worker who's been here for a whole year gets £16,000 roughly as their tax allowance, if you're only working for 3 months of that year, you would only get a quarter of that tax allowance, so £4,000, and then you'd pay tax on anything above that. Is the minister aware of that, and is that her understanding as well?
I'm sorry, Deputy, I'm not aware of that. I will absolutely check that out, because I've never found it, unless it's different for people who come here for a little while. It's happened to myself, it's happened to my family. You start a job at the beginning of the year and it's projected that you will earn and you'll pay that tax. If they've left after 6 months, and some have, and gone travelling, they get the tax back. So look, tax is not necessarily my area, but I was surprised when you said that. I'll get that completely checked out for you. But these are the things we need to be able to tell the farm workers who are coming on visa, who may not have English as their first language, in all the leaflets that myself and the Home Affairs Minister are working on for the next season. We want them to know their rights, and actually want to know their rights before they come. So we are on it, Deputy Tadier. Where was I? Yes, I agree. See, we've got two different things that we're trying to do here. We're trying to make sure the minimum people can live on their wage, and it be a minimum wage or a living wage. We've got to the 45%, and Deputy Southern says it should be more, and I agree it's late in getting there. And all this does is allow me to lay the order, and then when I've laid the order, it sounds like Deputy Southern or one of the reform will put in another price. That's when we have the big debate on what the minimum wage will be. I've set it at £9.22 because that was a similar figure that was consulted on across the board. even Chamber could live with it. And I do know it will be, it just possibly a little bit too much for the farmers, but I'm glad you heard Senator Farnham. We really have got to make sure we're not holding the minimum wage down here because of workers there, and actually, but I would never agree to having a smaller wage because it's an absolutely important job and it's a hard job, farming. So I wouldn't want these people earning less. So it's a difficult balance to get there. But some of it could be subsidies that he mentioned, social security payments, but it'll probably only be it'll be for the employees, maybe, but not for the employers. But there's lots to think about. The only other change, which I do think is good, from our consultation, minimum wage always used to go up on the 1st of April. Most industries would love it to go up. That's why this year it will go up on the 1st of January, and it just gives a whole year then. And when they're recruiting, like by about now, they know what the minimum wage is in January. So if you're bringing in workers, you're advertising, that will be the minimum wage. So, sir, I think I've tried to answer all the questions, and if I haven't, I'll try and find out the thing that Deputy Taddeo asked me, and I maintain the principles and ask for the appeal, please, sir.
Thank you very much. Grafia will put a link in the chat channel for the vote on the principles on P85. Seems to be a technical delay in getting the link out. Well, the appeal's been called for.
It might be that we're out of time. Sometimes it only runs for a 4-hour circle.
No, the 4-hour thing was a long time ago, Deputy.
All right.
Okay.
Being on the pulse.
So
Give it another go.
we had.
No, I've put it in 3
There
times.
appears to be a
Just coming up.
technical problem in that the Grafia's chat is quite different to everybody else's chat. Grafia's chat is full of votes.
So I wonder, in the absence of the vote appearing, and the interests of time, members would be prepared to take this on a standing vote.
Well, the appeal's been called for by the minister. She's entitled to ask for a recorded vote. It's our job to provide a means of recording the vote. And if you just bear with us for a second, we will make sure a link appears. We won't be using the chat, those members have asked, because that's we've done that before and it's chaotic. So if members could just hold off for a second, we will find a way of providing a link.
Oh, man.
So those in the chamber could vote verbally, if that helps.
No, I think we need to have one consistent way of recording the vote. So I'm just waiting for the. Luckily, we have 2 Grafias. The link is now available.
I'm offline.
So I'd invite members to cast their votes. This is on the principles of P85, if you've forgotten.
35.
I would ask members who see all the other links that have appeared to ignore them, because the votes work perfectly well, and I just ask members to cast their votes, because I will ask the greffier very shortly to close the voting. I am asking you to close it. Yes.
The vote appears to be like the buses, sir. We've now got 2.
Use wills.
It was all going so well this week.
Yeah.
The principles have been adopted. There were 37 votes per in the link, no votes contra. There were a number of other votes in the chat, 3 or 4, which we'll pick up when the vote is published. And there have been 2 extra votes since we announced the result, which I will allow, because obviously we've had some technical difficulties with timings around this particular vote. Deputy Lehegra, this proposition falls to your panel. Do you wish to call it in?
No, thank you, sir.
Minister, there are 2 regulations. How do you wish to proceed with them?
En bloc, sir, please.
Are the regulations seconded? Does any member wish
sir.
to speak to these regulations? Does any member wish to speak to the regulations? I heard a voice. If no member wishes to speak, I'm thinking I might take this on a stand and vote, unless anyone calls for the appel. The regulations are adopted. Minister, do you wish to proceed in 3rd reading?
Yes, sir.
Are the regulations seconded in 3rd reading? Does
Yes,
any
sir.
member wish to speak on 3rd reading? If no member wishes to speak, I will call for these regulations to be adopted in 3rd reading on a stand and vote, unless I hear a request for the appel. The regulations are duly adopted in 3rd reading. Brings us to the arrangement of public business. Deputy Alves.
Thank you, sir. There are some minor changes to the arrangement of public business from what was listed on the consolidated order paper. The debate on P76, the planning law amendment regarding trees, has been listed to resume on the 18th of January 2022, and P83 will be listed for a future meeting following the reference back today. We also have the resumption of P79, the Social Security amendment regarding the minimum earnings threshold, which was referred to scrutiny in September. There are currently only 5 propositions listed for the next meeting. As it stands, given there's the debate on the release of the CAM minutes, the meeting could go into Wednesday. And with that, sir, I propose the arrangement of public business for future meetings.
Is the arrangement of public business seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the arrangement of public business? If no member wishes to speak, I will assume that public business has been adopted on a standard vote, and the Assembly is therefore adjourned until 9:30 on Tuesday, the 2nd of November.